Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my medieval cooking party. I am the creative Contessa, and tonight we will be returning to Naples to explore yet another complex egg dish, another stuffed egg dish. Literally, it is called just that, stuffed eggs. So not a particularly original title, but I think it will get us through. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Where's everyone watching from? And is anyone else cooking? Erin, is that you? I can't. Oh no, Shellback Bo, you're there. Good to see you. It is a Sunday evening for both of us, you being over there in the Okinawa area. How are things over in your part of the world? It was a beautiful spring day today. It was so nice to be outside on the river in the pavilion doing a live stream on my travel channel. And now here we are doing a live stream on my medieval stuff channel. So just can't get enough of this live streaming, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Oh, Stargazer, it's good to see you again. Goodness, welcome back. Are you still awake or are you just getting up? Brandon, hello, nice to see you. Yeah, perfect weather, right? Like I always tell people, April and May are the best times to come to Japan and Korea. By June, July, August, it is unbearable here for the most part. Yeah, I mean, obviously in the northern parts of Japan, especially the northern islands, it's a different conversation. But about on this parallel, you don't want to be here for most of June, any of July, or any of August, and even the early parts of September are bitter. Okay, everyone. I'm just getting up. It's early, and I wanted to make it to this one. Well, thank you, Stargazer. I appreciate that so much. Right, so we are returning to Naples. Everyone, have any of you been to Naples? It is a very interesting city, and I would say underrated for the tourist in terms of tourist destinations. Of course, every time I've been to Naples, something very interesting has been happening, interesting to the point of possibly dangerous. The first time I was in Naples was in July, and there was a garbage strike, and the mafia back then controlled the garbage service. And so there were literally berms of trash lining the streets. And in July, that was not a particularly pleasant experience. You know, people always talk about, oh, medieval cities, they smelled so much. Medieval Naples was way cleaner than Naples in July of 2006 and smelled a lot better too. Yeah, July 2000, that was 2007, Shellback Bow, or 2006. Yeah, it was a special experience. It's happened multiple times, so that wasn't the only time that's happened. And the last time we were in Naples, the place where we were staying near the train station, there was gunfire in the night, which in places like Albuquerque is maybe not so unusual, but it's not so common in Europe. So that was an exciting experience. Yeah, Naples definitely has a much more authentic feel in the sense of it's a real city where people really live and work everywhere. There aren't really any tourist spots per se in Naples, not really anyway. So it definitely feels much more like a lived-in place. Whereas Florence absolutely has very plastic touristy spots. Rome has very plasticized touristy spots. Venice, Pisa, right? All of those really nice grand tour destinations have many neighborhoods where you can tell this isn't a real neighborhood anymore. But Naples is real everywhere, whether you want it to be or not. So I actually enjoy going to Naples for that reason. Also, Naples has a chapel that has a museum. So San Domenico Maggiore is a chapel that actually has extant 15th and 16th century royal garments from the royal crypts in drawers. And you can pull the drawer out and it's covered in plexiglass, but you can put your face right up to the plexiglass and get a really up close and personal look at extant 15th century and 16th century garments. No one's watching you. There's no one monitoring you. There's hose in there. There are doublets there. There's little girls' clothing. There's undergarments. There's overgarments. Yeah, it's an amazing collection, and it is completely not advertised in any real way. So yeah, that was a pleasant surprise when we stumbled on that in 2016, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I was there in winter, spring 2008, and they had the trash boycott going on, but I slept on the warship. Yeah, the trash boycott kind of cycles. It has come and gone, shall we say, over the years. Yeah. Okay, so everyone. Today we are going to be exploring a stuffed egg recipe, and we are returning again to our uh, our libro del cuoco napolitano. Wow, we've got some screaming happening outside. I'm not certain what's going on up there. Oh, it's an American. Yeah, of course it is. It's an American screaming at the top of her lungs in Korea. Ah, so great to be an ambassador of your country in this way. Anyway, we are returning to the Neapolitan recipe collection, and I thought I'd give some context for this. So first off, this is a book that is actually available on internetarchive.org, the Neapolitan recipe collection. Okay, so internetarchive.org is a fantastic free access internet library, basically, where hundreds, if not thousands, of books have been digitized and published so that you can read them right there in the book reader on the site. It's a free service, but they do accept donations. And if you have any extra funds to spare and you use internetarchive.org, please do donate. I do, just like I also donate to Wikipedia. Right. So this is a collection from the 15th century from Naples, but it is part of a greater tradition of cookery books, collections of recipes from 15th century Italy. And you can actually find many of the recipes in here contained in other contemporary Italian collections with more or less detail or slightly different details, slightly different instructions, which tells us that there was absolutely throughout Italy, and they're not just from Naples, I mean from northern Italy as well, which tells us that throughout 15th century Italy, as in other parts of Europe, there was a corpus of common recipes that everyone sort of knew, and maybe each, master chef, master cook, head cook had their own special take on. And many of these recipes are also found in collections in France and England. For example, there is an elderflower cheesecake in here. It's called sambucad. In other parts of Europe, in France and in England from the 14th century. So it's very interesting. Through these collections, we can again glean an idea of how interconnected medieval society actually was. And yes, the recipes contained in collections like this one in particular are absolutely upper class. They're for the upper end of the socioeconomic spectrum. 100%. I will never argue that this is how the common person ate. But this is still how thousands of people ate, because Italy was a very rich set of polities in the 14th and 15th century. Even the peasants, of course, people imagine these poor serfs. There weren't really serfs in 14th and 15th century Italy, or not. There weren't at all. And so peasants actually generally made a decent income. They actually worked their own lands often, or they held the lands in lease, and they actually made a pretty decent profit off of their crops. So much money that they had to keep books. We actually have expense accounts from peasants in 15th century Italy, 14th and 15th century Italy, in fact. And we know from their expense accounts that even the peasants often bought the kind of spices that are found in these collections. So I think we need to divorce ourselves from the idea of peasant equals poor. It doesn't in the medieval era, not in Italy, not anywhere. Peasants can be anything from rich to scrabbling in the dirt, just barely staying alive, right? It's not an economic status. It's a job description almost, more than anything else, right? It's someone who works the land, but by working the land, it doesn't mean they do it with their own hands necessarily. They may do well enough to pay other people to actually work the land, but they still count as a peasant. Yeah.
Ayla's on.
Ayla, lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so today we're going to be doing a stuffed egg recipe, and the format will be, I will read the recipe in its entirety, and then we will go through the recipe and think about how we're going to go about things and talk about any little details. So this is the recipe in translation. I can read the original Italian recipe because Italian was like the 8th language I started learning or something like that. So I will sometimes actually scroll back to compare the translation against the original Italian, which is provided in this edited version by Terence Scully in section 2, which is the recipes in their original Italian, but transcribed. And sometimes when I'm reading the translation, because I am a professional translator, actually, that's my original vocation, my original profession. Sometimes if I stumble across a part in the English that doesn't read so smoothly to me, I will go back and look at the original Italian. I don't always agree with Terence Scully's translations, but that's okay. That's the way scholarship works. We don't always have to agree with each other, right? Okay, so recipe is stuffed eggs. It is actually recipe number 149 in the Neapolitan recipe collection for those who wish to follow along. Yeah, I do. I have spoken fluently at times up to 5 languages. Most of my foreign languages are a little rusty right now, especially my European languages, because I don't really get to practice. I don't get to use them very often these days. My reading comprehension is still where it's always been, but I usually need a couple of hours to get the speaking back up to speed, shall we say. But that's all it takes. I can be in France for a day and my French comes back, sort of thing. Okay, stuffed eggs. First part. Boil fresh eggs whole in water until they are quite hard. Hard boil them, in essence. Shell them carefully, cut them in half, and lift out the yolk without breaking the white. Of the yolks, grind a part with a few raisins, a little old and new cheese, parsley, marjoram, and finely chopped mint, adding in 2 egg whites with mild spices, depending on the amount you are making. Mix all of this together with saffron and fill up the hollows left by the yolks. Then fry the eggs gently in good oil. See that a lot of cloves and cinnamon are in the filling. When they are fried, serve them. Okay, so some things you may have noticed, if any of you read recipes normally, you may have noticed that there are there's no timings here. No timings, no quantities really are mentioned except for a part of the yolks and a little, very, very, 2 egg whites. We do get, oh, thank God, to tell us how many egg whites to add. But what they don't actually say or don't indicate. Oh,
Haas is right. And he's on, by the way.
Oh, hi, Haas. Nice to see you. Why didn't you notice it before?
I was monitoring the chat. You've got a lot of people on there.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to my medieval cooking party. We are just reading through the recipe we shall be exploring tonight, a 15th century Neapolitan stuffed egg recipe. Right, so first things first, boil fresh eggs whole in water until they are quite hard. Well, it doesn't say how many. How many eggs? It tells us later on that we should add 2 egg whites to some quantity of eggs. So why, I've said this before and I'll say it again, why do medieval recipes from these sorts of collections generally lack the specifics? One reason could be that these recipes were not meant to be a step-by-step step of instructions for someone who has no clue. Or that they were even meant to be used by a cook. It could be that these recipe collections were actually meant to be a sort of resume, a sort of presentation piece from the master cook to their master or to a potential master. It could well be that such a collection of recipes was dictated by a head cook, who then paid for it to be turned into a nice finished product. And then that was presented to someone, a duke, a count, a prince, a pope, as a sort of, here is this thing that I've written in honor of you. And if you hire me, you see these recipes that are contained in this book that list all the fantastic ingredients that I know how to utilize. I will make them for you, but I will not provide enough details that your own cook could just make it himself, right? So you have to hire me. Or it could be that they are intended for fellow cooks or for posterity, but these recipes were in general so well known amongst cooks that they didn't feel the need to waste time on instructions that aren't necessarily needed, or precious materials on instructions that aren't necessarily needed, meaning space, ink, vellum, all very expensive. The scribe themselves, expensive, right? So they're actually trying to also save money by only providing the bare minimum needed. There are lots of theories as to those are not lots. Those are like the two main theories as to why. So, you know, it is what it is. The good thing about having other books that are in the same, or collections of recipes that are in the same tradition, is that if the same recipe is contained in other sources, we can sometimes compare it against those other sources. Unfortunately, I do not currently have the other books that are in this tradition and then might actually contain this exact recipe, so I cannot at this moment compare it to others to maybe fill in the holes, as it were. So we will be working with this holy recipe that doesn't tell us everything that we need to know in order to successfully recreate whatever the original was. Yeah, by the way, you might want to set it to subscribers only. I haven't done that. Handsome.
Yeah, I noticed.
Yeah.
Drink.
Yeah, drink, everyone. Contessa drinking game. So let us start here then at the beginning. Boil fresh eggs whole in water until they are quite hard. Shell them carefully, cut them in half, lift out the yolk without breaking the white. For any of you who have made deviled eggs, that should sound familiar. That is the exact same set of instructions that are the start of any deviled egg recipe, right? That you need the whites to be nice and whole. Yolks doesn't matter, but the whites need to be whole. So the first thing we have to decide is how many eggs that we are going to utilize for this. Yep. So this is an experiment. I haven't made this exact recipe yet, so I don't want to necessarily waste a lot of eggs on something that might turn out well, because the rest of the quantities are also a little bit mysterious. So I think we're going to do 6 eggs. We'll do 6 eggs. And if we lose 6 eggs, then if it's not terribly good, then I'll find a friend to feed it to. Okay, let's go ahead and start then by setting up our 6 eggs to boil. And while our 6 eggs boil, we will look at the other parts of the recipe and see what we can prepare while our eggs boil. So this is something I like to do in the kitchen whenever I am cooking from any era, is I look at a recipe and I figure out where I can find efficiencies, where I can have one thing going and then use the time that thing is cooking or boiling or braising or thawing or marinating, and use that time to then prepare the other ingredients. A lot of recipes don't necessarily take that into account. The recipe will just say like this: boil the eggs and then prepare your spices. And then, no, we will boil the eggs, and while the eggs are boiling, we will prepare whatever the next thing is to prepare. Okay, so just want to show you the beautiful replica 16th century Italian maiolica dish in which the eggs are presented. Isn't that nice? Okay, so we'll take 6 of these babies. And we will put them in water. And this is a clay pot. This is a traditional Korean clay pot. None of my medieval European clay pots are here, but it is a clay pot. It is a ceramic pot, very much like the kinds of clay pots that they would have had in 15th century Italy. So it shares a lot of similarities. So as much as I can, I'm trying to utilize the sorts of implements and tools that they would have had in 15th century Naples. I don't have my entire kit here. We are staying in a vacation apartment technically, and if I were to build a hearth here and actually build a fire with coals of the style that they would have used in 15th century Naples, I would probably set this place on fire. So being that I don't wish to be charged with arson, we're going to use a modern gas range for this, but we will be using this clay pot to help bring us more into the mindset of 15th century cookery. So we'll just go ahead and put some water here. Yes, and thereby you can see my background is not green screen. It is not CGI. It is in fact a real backdrop. See?
Ayla asked, were eggs smaller back then? I assume they're bigger now because we've selectively bred our animals.
Yeah, so it's
just for modern eggs.
That is a brilliant question. Were eggs smaller back then? It depends on. Right? It depends on compared to what. I have seen, organic heirloom chicken eggs that are pretty small. It's hard to tell because unfortunately medieval depictions of eggs, especially from the 14th and 15th century, aren't necessarily to scale because they're generally included in depictions that you can see the egg, which means they're usually depicted probably bigger than they would actually be. But I would say that it is likely that, the large and extra large eggs or extra large eggs are probably way bigger. Probably the eggs were on a smaller scale. And that is a very good point, Ayla. Yep. So that is something to keep in mind, is that a lot of food products are now so much more ginormous than they, and I know it's completely superfluous use, collation of words, but my point stands. Food is a lot bigger now than it was then. Almost everything is bigger. The fruit is bigger. Strawberries are crazy bigger. Cherries are bigger. Animals are significantly bigger, significantly. Way more meat on an animal and a bigger skeleton for any given species of animal compared to its medieval forebears. So yes. Now, just like now, there are some smaller varieties of fruits and vegetables. There are heirloom varieties that are closer to their medieval originals. There are heirloom varieties of animals, or species of animals, or subspecies of animal breeds. That's what I'm looking for. Breeds. Varietals is for plants. There are modern breeds, heirloom breeds of animals that are absolutely closer to their medieval ancestors. If you're lucky, you might have the luxury of having access to such a breed when it comes time to prepare your meal, your feast, your banquet. But you probably won't, and we just have to therefore make do, depending on where we are. But it is a good question, and the answer is that for the most part, everything was smaller, less fatty, less sweet, more bitter, less giant, less designed for long-term storage. Onions are a prime example. Yellow onions in the Middle Ages were not huge, and they also didn't have the thick skins, papery skins that they have now. So people who want to do onion skin dyeing for their medieval kit, I mean, you can do that, but it's not authentic. We don't even have evidence that they had onion skins as such, let alone that they used them for dyeing. We have lots of dyeing manuals, and they talk about all kinds of different plants and insects and roots and whatnot that one can utilize for dyeing. Onion skins is never, ever mentioned. And I'm pretty certain that if that had been common, they would have mentioned it, because the dyeing manuals do mention common weeds that were used for dyeing that weren't expensive necessarily. Madder was not that expensive, certainly nothing compared to kermes, for example. So yeah, the varietals and the breeds of almost everything were less than they are now, less than almost every metric, except for one, because they were smaller and because they grew in much richer soils than we grow in now, because medieval farming had a rotational system, a 4-field rotational system. And so they actually let their fields recover, and they didn't have to use all the horrible artificial fertilizers that we use now. Their foodstuffs were probably more micronutriently dense. So in that regard, medieval foodstuffs were not less, they were more. And their animals ate a much healthier diet and lived a much more natural lifestyle, which meant that their animals were also more micro and macronutriently healthy. Their fatty acid profile was healthier. They much more, their flesh and their organs were much more vitamin rich. So yeah, in that regard, the medieval originals were more than the modern varieties or breeds, but in almost every other dimension, they were less. Yep. And also probably more flavorful, in fact, for all of that. Yep. Yeah, much healthier food. Medieval people had access to much healthier food than we do. Isn't that? And I know, many of you are going to see, oh, but wasn't the Middle Ages this time of extreme poverty? Wasn't everyone dirty? Wasn't everyone poor? Didn't everyone just sit around in the mud waiting for progress to happen? No, that's a myth that actually started in the Enlightenment, and the Victorians it reached its peak under the Victorians, because things were so bad under the Victorians, and I mean really bad. Oh my God, horrible. The poverty that Dickens writes about, yeah, that was real. That squalor, that filth, the addiction to gin, addiction to opium, right? Extreme pollution, cholera, that is all an invention of the modern era. And so the Victorians desperately wanted to make themselves feel better about the horrible times in which they lived, and they wanted to hoodwink people, the poor people, who were the majority of people, by the way, into believing that they were living in the best of times. and they weren't. Because contrary to what everyone thinks, human progress is not a straight trajectory. It's not, we have not simply been on the rise since, the ancient Sumerians. We just haven't. We've made progress and we've lost it. We've made progress and we've lost it. We've made progress and we've lost it. And in different fields, we may have continued onward, and in other fields, we may have lost it. And so the medieval world, in many ways, was healthier, cleaner, and less poor than the 19th and early 20th century. Yeah, that's a reality. Yep. Yeah, the Victorians, is that you? That is you, okay.
That's me.
Like, what cheeky devil is saying that? Okay, so let's, back to our recipe. Our eggs are boiling. Well, they're cooking anyway. They'll boil someday. Right, okay. While they're boiling, let's look at the rest. It says 2 of the yolks grind apart with a few raisins. We're not there yet. Okay, so we're going to be grinding together ultimately yolks, old and new cheese. Okay, so what would old and new cheese be? Who knows? What to them old and new cheesies? It could be that old is definitely aged. I hate that translation. It should be aged cheese. That's the idiomatic word we use in English when it comes to cheese. No one wants to eat old cheese. We eat aged cheese. Just like no one wants to drink old wine. We drink aged wine. It's a very important difference between old and aged. Right. So what kind of aged cheese could they have had? Well, I've just recently discovered a 15th century cheese diary. No, I'm not exaggerating, by an Italian named Pantaleone. And a friend of mine, a follower and friend, I count him as a friend, named Kyle, he lives up in the London area, and there's a German translation of this cheese diary in the Wellcome Library. And he just recently went there and got a bunch of pictures for me, hopefully also of the sections about Italian cheeses. And so I'm hoping to soon expand my detailed understanding of what cheeses were available in medieval and Renaissance Europe. Because, ladies and gentlemen, yes, the art of cheese making goes back thousands of years, no doubt. But 100% the cheeses we have now do not necessarily reflect the cheeses as they were in the Middle Ages, even if the name is the same. It doesn't mean that in the 12th century cheddar cheese tasted the same as it does now. In fact, for certain, 99% certain it didn't, because in the case of cheddar cheese, some of the techniques that make it the way it is, that give it that crumble, that give it that nutty, salty flavor, that allow it to age to the point it does without molding, all those techniques were invented in the Industrial Revolution thanks to mechanization in part. So they didn't have those techniques in the Middle Ages to make the cheese that way, which means that any cheese that came from Cheddar, a region in England, in the 12th century is probably not going to be like modern cheddar. Also, everyone assumes that, now most cheeses that most people eat are made from cow's milk. But guess what? In the Middle Ages, it seems more cheese was made from sheep's milk, especially if you lived in a country where sheep were your primary quadruped. And in England, the production of raw wool in England was its economic driver. And so there were hundreds of thousands of sheep on any given day in medieval England, way more than there were cows. And those sheep were they were constantly trying to keep them lambing, so they were milking them all the time. So it is more likely that a cheddar cheese in the Middle Ages would have been sheep's milk and not made of cow's milk. In England, there's a big agricultural shift in the 17th century, and it shifts, and there's also a downturn of the wool industry. So there's a decrease in the number of sheep, and the enclosures actually that took the land away from the commoners and made a whole impoverished millions of people in England, those are the same acts that created pastures large enough to pasture more cows. And so in the 17th century, there is a shift from sheep's milk cheeses in England and sheep's milk in general to an increase in the production of cow's milk. And they also start selectively breeding cows to make them bigger and bigger and bigger and make them produce more and more and more milk. So that's Whole point is we cannot assume, and we should not assume, that a cheese that we have now tastes the same as it did 600 years ago. So I'm hoping one of the parts of this cheese diary that I have found, one of the lovely things about it is that it actually describes the cheeses. It actually describes their texture, their color, their flavor, how they melt, in fact, for the little sections that I've seen, which were sadly not the Italian cheeses. So the one section I did see was for brie, and it was called brie. And the description was exactly the way brie tastes and looks and feels now, right? So in that case, we have evidence that brie is maybe not so different. But we can't assume that for any cheese. So I'm hoping that I will get some more insight into actual 15th century Italian cheeses when I get my hands on this German translation of a text that is originally only available in macaronic 15th century Latin. And my 15th century Latin is just not good enough. And I don't feel like fighting my way through a step-by-step translation of it. So I'm excited to get a hold of this German translation. Yep. In the meanwhile, this leaves us with some choices that we have to make about our aged cheese and our new cheese. So I happen to have in my possession some nice mildly aged provolone. So I've read, apocryphally anyway, that this is an older cheese. So I'm going to go with the provolone as my aged cheese. And then 2 weeks ago, I made some fresh cheese. I made some new cheese, which maybe could be cream cheese. It could be farmer's cheese, but my new cheese is a slightly aged cream cheese, right? So we're going to use that as our new cheese in this recipe. Whether that is what they mean by a new cheese or a fresh cheese, we don't know. It could be that they mean more of a slight, like very fresh farmer's cheese, which would be drier and more crumbly and more like a cake. I can't get any of that here, and I haven't yet taught myself how to make it. Probably that's going to be my next step, is to teach myself how to make farmer's cheese. Because it should be cultured, and it shouldn't just be like, I don't think it should be like paneer. I don't think it should be sweet. I think it should still be cultured because the culturing would have been crucial to its preservation in this era. So I think maybe it shouldn't be that aged, but it should still be tangy. So I don't think it is like a paneer in this case. Yeah. Okay. Questions or comments?
Oh, lots of comments. And only a few of them that I had to ban.
Let me see. I think the smoked cheese I've had is a little too smoked. Yeah, I would say that it is very possible to have a cheese that is way too pungent, shall we say, on the smoked front. I don't think this should be smoked, and I'll be interested to see if there's any evidence of smoked cheeses in that cheese diary. Okay, our eggs are boiling. Great. So,
talking about which cheese is your favorite cheese.
yes. Oh, have we? Okay, great. Okay, so, so I think this is a 6-month provolone, and again, I don't, who knows what aged means in this case. I'm hoping again that cheese diary will cast some light on what counts as aged, right? And maybe what counts as new. But for now, we're going to go with provolone and my homemade cream cheese. Right. Okay, so then it calls for parsley, marjoram, and finely chopped mint. So here is fresh parsley. This is flat leaf parsley. That is what appears in, there's a manual, a health manual called Taquinum Sanitatis. And it is so popular a health manual that it's copied all over Europe. It appears in all sorts of manuscripts and in translations from the 13th century going forward. And Taquinum Sanitatis, one of the wonderful things about it is that it talks about the health properties of individual, not just foodstuffs, but raw materials, including linen and wool and flax and hemp, actually. And so it actually provides an illustration for each of those items. So we can actually see, to a certain extent, what 14th or 15th century cherries looked like, for instance, what parsley looked like. And flat leaf parsley is what is depicted in Taquinum Sanitatis. So you should generally, in these medieval recipes, if it calls for parsley, try to get flat leaf parsley. It's honestly the more flavorful of the parsleys anyway. So it's superior to curly leaf parsley, in my opinion. So we've got parsley, and then we've got mint. Where did my bowl of mint go?
Where did your bowl of mint go?
I don't know. I measured out the mint. Oh, wait, I know where it is. It's hiding under the parsley, right? And then we have mint. This is fresh mint. This is apple mint, and apple mint is a cultivar of mint that was grown in 15th century Italy. So you'll notice that it's not very big, right? It's not those huge mint leaves that you're used to. So this definitely probably comes closer to the kind of mint they would have had in 15th century Italy, just from the size alone. And then marjoram. Now we're currently in South Korea, and I have broken my brain trying to find a source of fresh marjoram. And we're in a vacation apartment, a rental apartment. I don't have the time or really place to grow my own fresh marjoram. So I have some dried marjoram. So we will be using dried marjoram. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to rehydrate it, because I'm pretty near finely chopped. It calls for these things to be finely chopped, which means they're expecting them to be fresh. So I'm going to go ahead and rehydrate this so it's a little moist, because if we were to add, which we learned from the stuffed egg recipe we did like 2 months ago, I think at this point, if we add these dry to the mixture, it's too dry. There isn't enough moisture in the mixture to counteract the dryness of these herbs. So if you use dried herbs, that's fine, but I would rehydrate them first. So we're going to do that right now. I'm just going to add a little bit of warm water to this, just to encourage it to hydrate. I've got an actual replica medieval spoon here. Isn't that beautiful? Check out the lovely little lady's head. And I think this one, I think was, I don't remember where I got this one. We've bought so many of these over the years. Okay, so I'm just gonna give this a stir. Encourage it to absorb some of that water. You can really smell that very, very signature marjoram smell. So herbs, the difference between spices and herbs. Basically, herbs are the green leafy part or the stem part. Spices are the bark, the roots, or the seeds. Right, so generally, depending on the plant, the harder part. And so herbs are something that these were weeds. These were like weeds in 15th century Italy. Anyone could have access to these herbs. This was, and in other places as well, this was before the Enclosure Acts privatized vast fields and put them in the hands of wealthy landowners and took them out of the commons. So 15th century is one of the last gasps of the commons, where anyone could have a spot to graze their cow, their sheep, their pigs, where anyone could go and just harvest the wild herbs, pick fallen wood, that kind of thing, right? This is the 15th century is the last gasp of that. And the 16th century is when the poverty starts to really increase because of starting with the Enclosure Acts. And then there's a whole host of other unjust laws that get passed that put the burden of the cost of society on the poor instead of the wealthy. But anyway, I digress. So anyone could have had herbs for their food. So one of the questions that many of you ask me, and people comment in general or inquire in general, is whether the food that the poor people ate was bland. Well, what do you mean by poor people? If you're talking about the bottom 80% of society in Europe, which would have been your laborers, your artisans, your farmers, your peasants, right? They always had access to these herbs. So their food was not bland. It was not bland. They just didn't have the spices. Spices were crazy expensive. Spices were like intergenerational wealthy, expensive, but herbs were not. And herbs are also plenty flavorful. Why spices then? Why were spices so popular? Spices had been popular on the European continent since at least ancient Rome, at least. And it's just because humans we like strong flavors. We do. Right? And so, yes, herbs give nice flavors, but spices give even nicer flavors. And then if you combine herbs and spices, all the better. But that doesn't mean that herbs alone equals bland food. It doesn't. And you can change up the kinds of herbs you have. And in medieval Europe, across medieval Europe, they used a much larger range of herbs than we now use. Much bigger range. Many of them very bitter, very pungent, much more pungent and much more bitter than we would now use. Pennyroyal was still being used. Sorrel, burnet, Rocket, arugula was being used as an herb. These days you might get a sprinkle of rocket arugula on top of a salad, but most people don't eat a whole arugula salad anymore, at least not in the United States. So yeah, it was, just because you could only maybe afford herbs didn't make your food bland. Okay, so box off. Right. Question, have you made chocolate with chili? I have. It's good. But remember, okay, you're talking about hot chocolate. So chocolate, brief thing about chocolate. Chocolate in Mesoamerica was not sweet. Chocolate in Mesoamerica was drunken as a thick, hot chocolate beverage with thick hot chocolate with chili pepper sprinkled in it. It was not a sweet beverage. It was more like thick coffee with chili pepper in it. It's the Europeans who added the sugar to it. So just want to make that clear. And the Europeans didn't add sugar to it until the end of the 17th century, the 18th century. It takes us a while to really get around to doing that, which is why it doesn't kick off as super popular immediately. And it mostly hangs around the Iberian Peninsula before finally spreading out through the rest of Europe in the end of the 17th century, I think, when Catherine de Braganza marries James II, I think. But that's Baroque stuff, and that's kind of, I'm now wandering into territory where I'm not as familiar with the history of food. Yeah. How many herbs and spices? Oh, very funny. Yeah. Actually, they had fried chicken in the Middle Ages, just not quite like you would recognize it. Yeah. Yeah. And then Americans added milk and it became shelf stable. What? Chocolate is shelf stable without milk? Milk does not make chocolate shelf stable. What a weird thing to say. Of course, I know the origin of hot cocoa. It's from Mesoamerica, right? It was the drink of the gods, basically. Of course, it comes from, it's the Aztecs drank it. It was a very thick beverage, not like we really understand it. Like I said, more like coffee, not sweet, with chili pepper in it. So yeah.
What's your question?
Yeah. What you have a question, Mr. Tin Man? Go ahead. Looking at our ingredients. Okay, so yeah, what's your question? And while
You look like you came out of Kingdom Come Deliverance.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. Kingdom Come Deliverance. I have reviewed the costumes in that show. They're okay. They're not great, but they're not the worst I've ever seen. And Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is better, but also with the women especially still not as good as it could be. Anyway, yeah, thank you. Actually dressed in 1470s to 1490s Florentine, but with this neckline more like 1480s Florentine clothing, because today we are doing 15th century Italian cookery, specifically Neapolitan. So I'm dressed, of course, appropriately for that kind of cooking. Yep. Oh, let me see. Mangchi, hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, Mangchi. Yeah, that's what it's. No. I can't tell if that's a double hash or a single hash. I think it says Mangchi. Sorry, your name is very, very tiny on the screen.
Mangchi.
Yeah, I thought so. It's Mangchi, right?
Chi-chi.
Yeah, Mangchi. Did everyone know how to make butter during this time period back then? It's funny you should say that. Did everyone know? No. In many parts of the world, butter was never made. It was a sort of steppes European thing, as far as I can tell. There's actually an Italian traveler from the 15th century who goes to Crete, and he actually writes about feta cheese, which sounds exactly like feta cheeses now, by the way. That is one place where I can say, yeah, this seems to be exactly the same based on this description that he gives. But what he says that they make feta in Crete, they make feta cheese in the 15th century. They make feta cheese in such massive quantities because they don't know how to make butter, is what he says. He says, so they basically have to turn all of their cream and milk into feta cheese, and it's very fatty because they don't know how to make butter. That's what he says. So apparently not everyone could make butter in this era. Yeah. Oh, Seoul. Hello from Daegu. Thank you for joining me from Seoul. Awesome. Welcome to my medieval cooking show. Today we are in 15th century Naples, and we are about to actually, you're dressed like an old Irish bakery woman. Well, I don't think so. maybe, but this is 15th century Italian. You can tell that from the sleeves and the replica 15th century gem and the very 15th century kerchief. But you know, some looks come back into fashion occasionally. What can we say? What can we say? But it was goat milk. Wait, question. China had butter in 1200, but it was goat milk. Zatim or Zakim, I'm sorry, I'm not certain how to pronounce that name. It could be pronounced many different ways depending on one's pronunciation key. What is your, I'm very interested in your evidence for butter in China, and also what part of China. Are you talking about the Mongols? Because they, of course, actually had a dairy culture, have a dairy culture to this day, in fact. I'd be interested for the documentation for butter in China in 1200. Yeah. But not everywhere, not even everywhere, even in Europe had butter, apparently, according, not in the 15th century anyway, not according to this particular person. So no, butter is not, you can't take it for granted that people make butter, apparently. Yep. Okay, so let's get to our recipe. Our eggs are boiling, and I think they're probably boiled at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat off and let them cool while we look at the rest and prepare the rest of our ingredients. So it says that we're going to need parsley, marjoram, and mint, all finely chopped. Now, we have to talk about our quantities of those items, right? So we don't know. There's no quantities here. So now we have to decide. So we have 6 eggs. 6 egg yolks, and we're only supposed to use a part of them. I expect probably about half of the egg yolks because we're going to be adding ingredients to it that will take up, that will bulk out, right? So we're going to be adding cheese and fresh herbs and egg whites. So that's all going to bulk out the mixture. And obvious, it's very clear that we don't want to overstuff the eggs because we're not going to be frying them. So overstuffing could be tragic in terms of what happens in the cooking oil. So now we have to decide on our quantity of, did you ever bring me a notebook? You did not.
Oh, no, I forgot about
You did not bring me a notebook. Okay, so now we have to decide on our quantity of our parsley, and I'm going to go by weight, and I'm going to take notes so that if this turns out well, I can actually publish a recipe for everyone to then make them, and I'll share that with my patrons, channel members, and Facebook subscribers. But for that, I am definitely a scale person. I prefer weights over volumetric measurements for dry ingredients, right? In the Middle Ages, they had scales. They had very sophisticated balance scales, actually, with very finely and very finely calibrated and very tightly regulated weights. I am definitely want to get my hands on a replica 15th century balance scale. I don't have that, so we're going to be using my digital scale for the nonce. Okay, so I think I really like the way this sprig of parsley looks, especially with the new fresh baby growth in the middle. And I feel like this is probably about enough once I chop this up for the number of egg yolks we have. So I'm going to go ahead and just weigh this and see how much that is. 15 grams. Okay, 15 grams of parsley.
What did they use for scales back then?
So they had balance scales in the, up until very recently, actually, balance scales were the thing. And humans have been using balance scales. I think the oldest one I've seen, I think, was Sumerian or Babylonian. We've been using balance scales for a very ancient Babylonian. We've been using balance scales for a very, very, very long time. So it's a recognized, efficient, and accurate way of weighing things to a certain bottom threshold below which you really do need a digital scale. So yeah, a balance scale, the scales of justice, right? You have 2 balances connected by a crossbeam on chains, and you put a known weight on one side, you know, an official standardized weight that is, for example, 1 pound or whatever, and you put your thing to be measured on the other side, and you keep adding weights in decreasing gradations until you reach a balance, until it's balanced, and then you know how much your thing weighs. So that's what they would have used in a medieval kitchen. That is also what they would have used, what they used in the apothecary, what they used for goldsmiths. Any kind of metal workers utilize scales. Anyone selling grain, anyone selling anything by weight, and there were lots of items that were sold by weight. Those people had balance scales. In medieval Germany, on the rivers, and other parts of Europe as well, but specifically Germany where I lived, for instance, on the Main River, there were cities that made their wealth, that became wealthy cities because they were right on the Main River, and they actually ran a chain across the river, and then the ships, because the rivers were the highways in medieval Europe, that's how goods were transported in large quantities. And so they would run a chain all the way across the river, and the Main is a big river, by the way, and they would force ships to stop and pay a toll based on the goods that they were selling. And so in the 14th century city hall of Miltenberg am Main, still there, they have the remnants of the giant balance scales that they used in the city hall to weigh goods of the merchant ships that were floating down the Main, to charge them a toll that was predicated on the weight of the goods they were trying to ship down the Main. And this is what made Miltenberg a crazily rich city in the Middle Ages. And that's why to this day, Miltenberg is a gorgeously medieval city, because its last economic heyday was the 16th century, basically, and it got poor after that. So they couldn't afford to update any of the facades of the buildings. So that is why it's still a beautiful medieval city and not a beautiful neoclassical city or a beautiful Baroque city even. Yeah. Yeah, fun little trivia. Okay, so we've got 15 grams of parsley. Check. And now let's see, how much mint? How much mint? Right. So now, let me be honest. When I cook myself for myself, and I'm not making up a recipe that maybe someone else should follow, I'm very much an intuitive cook. I cook by pinches and handfuls and dashes and grasp, I'm an eye cook. I don't really measure much, not even when I bake, honestly. But I've been cooking and baking since I was old enough to stand up, and my father taught me how to cook and how to bake. And so I have an intuitive sense of it. But I understand that not everyone does, and that's fine. So that's why we're going through the process of measuring out what I kind of intuit will be a good amount. Oh, it smells so nice. It really does. Doesn't that look beautiful? Isn't that just so gorgeous? Okay. So this is, and when you're using a digital scale or any scale, honestly, you want to tap it, just give it a light tap to make certain that it's not playing tricks on you. Just trust me on that. They're sentient and they're evil. Okay, so we've got 4 grams of apple mint. Now, some of you might ask me, could I use a different kind of mint? Certainly, you could. What I found is that apple mint was something that was grown in 15th century Italy, so I went with this. I haven't really looked to see what other kinds of mint may have been available in 15th century Italy, so I can't advise you on whether spearmint or winter mint or peppermint, whether they were or were not available in 15th century Italy. Okay, we've got our green herbs. And now it says to chop them. So I'm now also going to go ahead and drain the eggs and put some cold water on them and let them cool so that we can actually deal with them in a moment, hopefully. Apple mint it's just a kind of mint. So there are different kinds of mint. There's spearmint, there's winter mint, there's peppermint. Those are all different cultivars of mint. So it's basically, apple mint is actually pretty small. Here, let me show you. It has a much smaller leaf. So you can see how small that is. It doesn't, as far as I can tell, it doesn't taste like apple in any way. So I don't know why it is called apple mint, but that is what it is called. So it's just a cultivar of mint, like spearmint, like winter mint, like
I think it looks like
peppermint. Maybe because it looks like apple leaves. Yeah, it could be.
It's a guess.
Yeah, could be. Okay, so we're just going to set this on the side to cool, and I'm going to not have tea because I didn't make myself any, so I'm going to have some water.
Is this good, Boots?
Okay, so while our eggs cool, we're going to go ahead and prepare our herbs because they should be chopped. For those who don't know, parsley can be a little tricky. The stems to a certain point are perfectly edible, but then there's a point at which it gets stringy and very unpleasant. So you can usually tell this, by how it chops. If your knife goes through it really easily, then it's fine and it's edible. If you have to fight a little bit more and it gets stringy, you don't want that in your dish. It will just end up making a very unpleasant texture. So go ahead and chop. Yeah, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So we really want this to be chopped pretty finely because we don't want big, huge leaves inside of our eggs. We want it to blend really nicely. We want nice, harmonious flavors. And knives, I actually have some replica medieval kitchen knives, and they're very good. They are very efficient. They're very sharp. They will reduce things at about the rate you see here. Right. So medieval knives, very high speed. The blades on medieval knives tend to be a little more rounded than this. Modern blades tend to be very straight. And actually, I don't know if any of you are actually familiar why we went for Takeda. Takeda, are you there? Takeda, we need your expertise. I know you know a lot about knives and metal and smithing and why things would have changed with the kitchen knives, why they went from being rounded to being more straight. Give that a minute. Okay, this looks pretty nice. And I'll give it one more run through. Okay, fantastic. Now, since these are all going to get mixed in, I have no problem with just putting the mint on top of this and chopping it next. And I'm not, so these stems are a little stringy, a little woody, so we're not going to keep those in. I'm going to strip the leaves off and put them on top of the parsley and then just keep chopping. I guess I could have chopped it all together, but the parsley I could have, but I think it's easier to do it this way because the parsley was of a different shape. Easier to control when it's just that I'm worrying about instead of these much smaller leaves. But I definitely don't recommend including the stems. The stems, if you wanted to save the stems for something, you could probably infuse water with the stems because the stems do also have a mint flavor to them. So for example, I would crush the stems like that to break them open, and then I would just put it in water. I'll do that right now, in fact, for my water. And we do know that infused water is, in fact, something that was served at the very least in 14th century France. I haven't necessarily seen evidence of it outside of the Ménagier du Paris, the Goodman of Paris, that fantastic 1391 guide to keeping a perfect medieval household. But it wouldn't surprise me if other people were making infused water as well. The Goodman of Paris comments provide several recipes for different infused waters that he says specifically should be served to guests.
Mint-flavored turnip.
Mint flavored turnip? What?
I guess he did not say that.
I did not say a mint flavored turnip. I'm not certain what I might have said that would have been close to a mint flavored turnip. Yeah, so, I'm always looking for ways to utilize the waste, the off cuttings, the stems, the things you don't, include in the recipe because I hate food waste. With the parsley stems, that's easy. For parsley stems, I save them and then I utilize them when I'm making bone broth or chicken stock or beef stock or some kind of broth because the parsley really adds, the parsley stems add quite a nice flavor. But when you are making bone broth, I really recommend that you add the vegetables in towards the end of cooking. If you add them too soon, it will actually give your broth a musty, unpleasant flavor in my experience. So I recommend adding things like parsley and onion clippings and carrot ends and celery ends and whatnot towards the end of cooking your broth, not early on. And also, if you're making bone broth and it ends up being a little funky, you can actually clarify it with egg white. That's actually a good use for egg white, and it's one of the uses. So in many medieval recipes actually call for egg yolks, but not the whites. And in those, I really do think that in a medieval kitchen, they just kept a bowl of egg whites around, and they could then use it for a variety of purposes, of common purposes in a medieval kitchen. And clarifying broth is absolutely one of the things that they could have used it for. In fact, I think there's a recipe in this collection, but if it's not in this collection, there's a couple of other collections I've read where they specifically say, if your broth needs to be clarified, add an egg white. So it was a technique that was familiar to medieval cooks as well. Okay, that smells so good. It smells so fresh. It really does. Oh, some of you have heard me diatribe about medieval hygiene before. And I found in one of my recent posts about medieval hygiene and how actually fastidious medieval people were about being clean, one of my followers provided a beautiful quote straight from Chaucer, from the Miller's Tale, that actually references that Absalom, one of the characters, he's described as chewing on grain and licorice root to make his breath smell sweet. And he does that in the morning before he even combs his hair. So one of the first things this man does in this as a daily part of his routine is he wakes up and he does something to freshen his breath, licorice root and grain. And that would be a very, very powerful way to freshen your breath. And then he combs his hair, right? So it's more evidence against this nonsense of medieval people were dirty, they smelled bad, they had foul breath, etc., etc., etc. So licorice root, great way to clean your teeth and freshen your breath. And licorice root is actually has a lot of active ingredients in it, medicinal active ingredients. So it probably would have been a good thing just to boost his general health, aside from also probably being antiseptic for his mouth. Okay, so we have our mint and our parsley. Our marjoram is over here, and it is just these herbs are really just not wanting to rehydrate very well. Well, they have a little bit more time to rehydrate before they get added to the slurry, as it were. Right, so let's go back to our recipe. We've boiled our eggs. They are now cooling. I'm going to actually drain this water and add more cool water to help them cool further. Medieval kitchens and water supplies. So some medieval kitchens actually had running water, believe it or not. Some kitchens actually had access to a well that was centrally located in the house. And there was actually a well pulley system that ran through all floors of the palace, from the roof all the way down to where the well was sunk, so that on any single level, people could actually get water by hoisting it up directly from the well. So they didn't actually have to carry the water up the stairs. They would just wind the pulley and bring the water up to them. So this is, for instance, the case in many palazzi in medieval Florence, including the Palazzo Davanzati, where the kitchen is on the roof. And let me tell you, in the medieval world, you definitely want your kitchen to be on the roof, because if your kitchen catches on fire, and it's probably the most likely room to catch on fire, you'd rather it be the top floor than the bottom floor. Just saying. So yeah, so some kitchens had most kitchens, especially great kitchens, had easy access to fresh water. Kitchens on the lower end of the spectrum, they would have to go out to maybe the town well, the village well. They might have to go out to a river or a stream to fetch water, in which case, for those kinds of households, it's very likely that they found ways to not waste water. They maximized the use of the water that they had, right? We're fortunate here, we have running water, so it's easy for me to add water to cool these eggs. Right, okay, so we have raisins. So I'll just show you the raisins, right? They're just dried grapes, basically, and these are dried red grapes. a little old and new cheese, which we have, but I haven't weighed how much cheese we have. So I'm just eyeballing how much cheese I think there should be. We'll find out if this is the right amount of cheese once we make them. We might decide it was way too much cheese, in which case I will make a note of it. Okay, so this is about 81 grams of provolone. Provolone. And okay, and this is 38 grams of cream cheese. So ultimately, this is all going to get fried. And then we have to decide about the kind of frying that we're going to do for this recipe. Okay, so we've got our cheeses all set up. And now we have to also look at the spices. So we're going to add 2 egg whites in. I'm going to say actually it's probably just 1 egg white for the amount of mixture we have. But if I see that we need more egg white, this is egg white, we'll see about cracking an egg open and getting another egg white. Let's talk about the spices. So it just says mild spices, which is interesting because it says add mild spices. And then at the very end, it says, see that a lot of cloves and cinnamon are in the filling. In my world, and I'm pretty certain in the medieval world, cloves did not count as a mild spice. And it also feels to me like the person dictating the recipe forgot about the cloves and the cinnamon, and they had already gotten to the part of and fry the eggs gently in good oil. And then the person dictating said, oh, wait, yeah, also see that, there's cloves and cinnamon in there, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to add it at the end of the recipe after you've already fried them. You can't add something to the filling after it's already cooked. That's like trying to unscramble eggs. So I'm going to say that we should be adding it earlier on in the recipe. But the mild spices, what are mild spices? I haven't found any reference in this particular collection of recipes to what exactly count as mild spices, but I'm going to assume that probably pepper is not among the mild spices. Long pepper is probably not. I would have assumed cloves weren't, and yet there we are. So I'm actually just going to take a spice blend that is called poudre douce in French, sweet powder. And this is a compilation of a variety of more gentle spices like nutmeg, like cinnamon, like ginger, which may or may not be a mild spice, who knows. And we're going to use that as our mild spices. But the recipe does then also call specifically for cinnamon and cloves. So we're going to go ahead and grind up some new fresh cinnamon. And this is Ceylon cinnamon, everyone. If a medieval recipe calls for cinnamon, this is what it's calling for. So notice that it is not one single scroll of cinnamon, not one curl of bark, but rather lots and lots of layers of bark laid into each other. If it's a single thick curl, that is actually cassia. That is not really cinnamon. And in medieval cookbooks, it is called cassia. Cinnamon, cinnamomum verum, is this. It's actually milder than cassia. Also, Tomikor is there. Awesome, Tomikor. See you. Thank you for joining us today. So cinnamomum verum is the one that is the version of cinnamon, true cinnamon is what that means, Ceylon cinnamon. It is the version that actually has all of those health benefits that are touted for cinnamon. Cassia doesn't have those health benefits. In fact, cassia in large enough quantities is actually toxic. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So when you're using a mortar and pestle, and actually, you know what? I'm going to use the big one for this because we're going to use the big one ultimately anyway, right? Yeah. Okay. Are you ready to see my comically large mortar? This is my comically large mortar. Yeah, we are getting closer to actually, we're getting closer to fixing. Handsome, could you bring me the comically large pestle, please?
The comic, oh, yeah.
We are getting closer to having the comically large pestle ready for operation, but we're not quite there yet. But here is our comically large pestle. Contessa for scale.
I can't use it on the counter with it.
No, I can't. No, I'd have to put it on the ground. So when you're using a pestle this big, you put the mortar on the ground. And if you look at medieval depictions of people utilizing a mortar and pestle in Korea as well, the mortar is on the ground and they're standing up and putting the full wrath of their body behind it. Right. So I can't wait. I can't wait to use this bad boy. But unfortunately, it was neglected badly. And so we've got some cracks we need to repair. But we found a good wood filler that we're going to use to do that, because Takeda, we can't do what you suggest. That's beyond our ken and beyond our capabilities here, shall we say. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to remove these herbs into a little bowl. And everyone, if you're going to use your knife as a bench scraper, do not use the blade, use the backside. Don't use the blade. You will dull your blade if you use your blade as a bench scraper. Okay. When you are using a mortar, it helps if you break up, chop up, pre-chop, pre-break up anything you put in the mortar. It will make the mortar go faster. The knife and the mortar and pestle are really the ultimate food processing duo in a pre-mechanized kitchen. And really, they work just as well as a blender does. It just takes more time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grind up the cinnamon. And if you can, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I apologize to all of you who are, who've been on all of my cooking shows. So you've heard the spiel before, but we have some new people. So I thought I would add that if you have the time, that it is best to leave your spices whole and ground them as you need them. They will be fresher. They will be more pungent. Their health properties will actually be better intact, because when you grind up these spices, you're exposing the inside of them to oxygen, and oxygen is deleterious, right? It's corrosive. So you actually start oxidizing the good parts of your spice, and it thereby also loses flavor. It loses potency. So it's better, if you can, to keep your spices whole, grind them as needed. And I get that not everyone has that time. So no judgment from me, my friends. I'm just saying that if you can have the luxury of a slow food experience, take it. And if you can't, that's fine too. But we live in a very unnatural way in the West anyway. Living alone, living even just one generation, just mother, parents and children. No. It used to be that it was parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and children, and grandchildren or great-grandchildren, right? Multiple generations in a home, aunts, uncles sometimes, mostly aunts, which meant that there were many different people to help with the tasks of running the household, also to help with raising children and watching the children. So in many ways, pre-World War II life was, in some ways, not in every way, but in some ways, less anxiety-inducing and less stressful. There were other things to drive anxiety, though. Certainly before antibiotics and vaccines, surviving childhood was not a guarantee. So there is that. Which, by the way, there's this odd myth that medieval parents did not love their children because their children were just as likely to die, so they developed a very callous attitude towards them. In fact, it seems that the threat of death made them love their children even more. We have plenty of records that people have left behind, letters, poems, chronicles that describe the anguish that parents felt when their children died. Right? So there's Alessandra. Alessandra, the microphone came off. Alessandra Strozzi, when her youngest son Matteo dies, youngest surviving son Matteo dies, she writes a letter that is filled with grief, right? And she'd already lost her husband and 3 other children to the plague. So that shows you that she did not grow numb to death, to the pain of mourning or the pain of loss. She was more, maybe even more sensitized to it. So another myth flouted. Medieval people loved their children just like we love our children, or hated them just like we hate them, right? They were human. They were like us. They were not that different than us in many ways. Tea with Tosh. Welcome, my dear. Good to see you again. Okay. Gosh, I love this thing so much. Nice, huh? Oh, it smells so good. Unfortunately, I think I need to start wearing a breath mask when I grind cinnamon. I think I'm going to develop cinnamon lung. Coal miners get black lung. I'm going to get brownish red lung, I guess. I'm serious, though. Probably should be wearing a mask. It grinds pretty finely. Okay, so there we have our cinnamon. I'm going to go ahead and add, so that was 1 stick of cinnamon. Right, I'm documenting this time, everyone. Didn't document it last week. 1 stick of cinnamon. About 1 teaspoon of poudre douce.
I will say cinnamon lungs is a terrible stripper name.
Cinnamon lungs is a terrible stripper name. Oh, that actually, yeah, it's about a teaspoon. 1 teaspoon of poudre douce. You're right. I should have weighed it. I didn't. Mea maxima culpa. Okay, so we have our, I'm going to go ahead and add in our spices because basically everything is going to go into this this mortar.
Is a great stripper name.
What is?
Poudre douce.
Poudre douce is a great stripper name. So true. Okay, so we are going to be grinding everything in here in this mortar because the instructions say of the yolks grind apart with a few raisins, a little old and new cheese, parsley, marjoram, and finely chopped mint, ultimately adding in 2 egg whites. So I'm going to pre-tear up the cheese basically to get the process started. As I said, it's easier to grind things in a mortar if you've already started the process, basically. Okay. Marjoram goes in. Okay, and then there's another thing that's added also at the end. And I feel like it's because the person dictating this recipe wasn't really paying attention. So it also says to add in some saffron. Mix all of this together with saffron. So here is saffron. Why are you laughing?
Tash said, "What is your medieval stripper name?" And Ayla said, "Not where I saw the chat going."
Okay, I will allow it. Everyone, what would your own medieval stripper name be?
Oh, medieval stripper name even.
Specifically medieval.
Cinnamon bisque.
Cinnamon bisque. Really? Jesus. God. Okay.
Yeah, that's not norm for this chat.
Not where we saw the chat going. No, it never is. It never is where we see the chat going, is it, guys? Okay, so next we have saffron as another of the spices that should get added in here.
Tom Thumb.
Tom Thumb. Nice. Nice. I can't think about medieval stripper names or I won't remember whether it was going. Saffron. Saffron. Saffron is the stamina of a very specific crocus. It is not just any crocus that can produce this. It was very expensive in the Middle Ages, and it continues to be expensive now for the same reasons that it was expensive in the Middle Ages, because it must be planted and harvested by hand. And so it's a process that thus far cannot be mechanized. So there's a lot of fake saffron floating around out there if you go to spice bazaars and markets. So you have to be careful. I've told some of you this before. I'll say it again. A friend of mine went to Egypt and asked me what I would like to be brought back. I said, well, you're going to the spice bazaar, so I would like some saffron. Well, he brought me back marigold petals. And he was so proud of himself because he got such a good deal on the saffron. He got a terrible deal on the marigold petals, though.
They're coming up with your stripper name.
Oh, great. I'll accept. I encourage you all to come up with my medieval stripper name, please.
Mistress Manna.
Mistress Manna. Mistress Manna. I love it. I love that. That's awesome. Okay, while you're coming up with my medieval stripper name, let me tell you about the saffron. So the saffron, you if especially if it's going into something that's sort of wet like this is, it should be ground. It should be ground first. And the thing is that these medieval cookbooks almost never talk about how to handle the saffron. So this is something that we need to take into consideration ourselves. How are we going to pre-process the saffron? You do not. You do not want to just add strands of saffron into your mixture. That will be unpleasant, to say the least. We also have to think about how much we want. Now, I put a lot of saffron in here so it would be visible, but we're not going to use all of this saffron for just 6 eggs. So we're probably going to go with more like a pinch. Like this, because saffron is actually pretty pungent, like that. Pinch of saffron. And now we're going to grind it. And the trick I use with this, we grind the saffron, and there's actually a Persian cookbook that from the 16th century that talks about adding salt or sugar in to your mortar with the saffron and grinding it together. And then the salt will actually help you grind the saffron better. And it really does. It really works. It's amazing how well it works adding that extra abrasive in with your saffron. And since I would have wanted to add some salt into this anyway, despite the fact that the recipe doesn't call for it, it works out well. See, look how well powdered that is now. Right. Oh, what? Okay, so what are the stripper names they've been coming up with?
Now we figured out that the grinding wheel can turn, and now she's turning it.
What? Our cat?
Yeah.
Our cat is turning the grinding wheel?
She was, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe we can train her to grind things for us. That would be great. That would be fantastic. Okay. So we have a liquid that is going into this, and I'm going to use that liquid to actually get out the whatever the excess saffron that's in here. Do we have, we don't have a pastry brush. Could you give me a clean paintbrush, please?
We have a pastry brush. I mean, the brush that I just got for the...
Or is the pastry brush in here? It's in here. Okay. We need a nicer pastry brush than this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so pastry brush to get...
Did you say to add in sugar or salt to the grinding?
I did. So when you are grinding saffron, this is a 16th century Persian trick. He specifically says, Norola is his name, is the head cook's name, Norola, says to add salt or sugar into the mortar with your saffron when you're grinding it, and it will make it grind more finely. And by God, he is so right. Look at this. Look at how fine that saffron becomes. It's almost like magic. Like really, it is kitchen magic.
Look at that.
Kitchen sorcery, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and add this in now. And then this is a trick from that I use in general. There is a liquid going into this. The liquid is the egg whites. I'm going to actually use the egg whites to clean out the rest of the saffron from the mortar, right? So I put the egg whites in this mortar, and I actually use the pestle to swirl them around, and it will actually absorb up any leftover saffron. Actually, the egg, they're already turning yellow from the amount of saffron that was sort of left clinging to the sides of the mortar. So this is a trick that allows you to prevent waste of any of that very, very, very expensive saffron. And I said this last week, and I'll say it again. This technique is suggested by the Ménagier du Paris, who in 1391 writes this book of perfect household management for his 15-year-old bride. And actually at her request, and he suggests that if you have spices to grind, you grind them first. And then if you have breadcrumbs or something else to grind that goes into the same dish, grind them next in the same mortar, and they will absorb up the spices that have been left behind in the bowl. In this case, a liquid works really, really well, especially with saffron. So you can actually see, maybe, I don't know. It's really hard to see from that angle how yellow it actually is becoming. Oh, maybe if I watch this. Yeah, maybe that works better. So you can see how yellow that the egg white now is from the leftover saffron. Right. So, and also by pre-mixing the egg white, that's going to make it mix in better to the mixture that we are creating in our giant, comically large mortar. Any other good stripper names, Handsome?
Sounds frivolous and expensive. The Grinding Maid.
The Grinding Maid.
Safresqua.
Safresqua? Right. Okay, so we're now to the part where we actually need our egg yolks, basically. So here we go with our egg yolks. Now I have a trick whereby I actually crack them lightly in water, and then the water actually kind of invades through those cracks and helps separate, hypothetically, helps separate the shell from the egg, which should hypothetically make the peeling easier. It works most of the time. So you don't want to crack it too much because you don't want to crack the white itself. You just want to crack the shell, just craze the shell basically so that the water actually enters into it, just into the layer between the shell and the egg white. Okay. Now, egg whites. Egg whites contain calcium, and there is actually some use for eggshells. Eggshells contain calcium, and there actually is use for eggshells in some medieval art applications. So probably they would not have thrown the shells away either. I mean, really, the medieval economy was so very circular because the eggshells can be ground up and then used as an abrasive, as a way to scrub down vellum, for instance, to rough it up so that you can prepare it to actually paint it and calligraph on it so the ink in the paint will actually stick to it. Cuttlefish was also used for that. Okay, fantastic.
That's my stripper name.
Cuttlefish? Okay. Oh, that delightful egg smell. I love eggs, but boiled eggs have a very unpleasant scent, do they not? So yeah, the thing that makes deviled eggs deviled, I think, modernly is actually the addition of paprika to them. Paprika is a spice that did not exist in Europe in the 15th century. In fact, I don't think it existed yet at all because I don't think the Mesoamericans prepared their chili peppers that way, but I could be wrong about that. At least not, paprika is technically the skin of the pepper, right? So peppers are one of those fruits, it is a fruit, that is brought over to Europe and Asia and Africa and the Pacific Islands as part of the Columbian Exchange. It was not endemic to Europe at all. It was not native to the Old World at all. And so it's one of those introductions that revolutionizes cuisine in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Can you imagine Indian curry without chili peppers? Can you imagine Thai food without chili peppers? Can you imagine Spanish food without paprika? I mean, it's really, really hard to imagine Hungarian food without paprika. And yet, within only a couple of centuries, the chili peppers took over. Although it did take time. They were not an instant hit. In fact, when they first were introduced to Europe, no one wanted them. No one liked them. Same thing in Asia. Most people thought they were just painful. They didn't like it at all. India too. Imagine Indian food. No chili peppers. No peppers. Peppercorns, which are not chili peppers, right? So you can imagine all of these cuisines, not only, oh, we've got to cut these open first. Not only did they not have chili peppers, they didn't have tomatoes, didn't have potatoes, didn't have maize, didn't have vanilla. Let's see, green beans. What else? There's another big one that came over from the Americas and that basically revolutionized cuisine. Nevis brought it up the other day and I'm trying to remember what it was. But the Columbian Exchange went both ways, right? It was an exchange. So things that were introduced into the New World, the Americas that were not there before, pigs, beef, horses.
Yep, no spuds.
Yep, no spuds, no spuds. Imagine all of these Europe, Africa, Asia dishes and no potatoes at all.
Just be Mackenzie.
Yep, none at all. Okay, so we're just going to put the egg whites off to the side. Actually, I have to say, this is the nicest eggs have ever peeled for me as a whole ever. So I'm really glad this happened with everyone watching. Instead of what usually happens, which about half of my egg whites are pretty looking and the others look like modern art. So yeah, I'm glad it went this way. So I'm now just adding
chocolate. Chocolate's the big.
Oh yeah, chocolate, right? Chocolate. Yeah, chocolate. Yeah, chocolate.
Okay,
Can you imagine the world without chocolate?
Here's a good question.
Yes, good question.
So, shoot, where'd it go? Shellback Bow asks, in City of God, St. Augustine mentions corn. What was he referring to?
Good question. So the word corn, so this is why I said maize. The word corn is actually Old English for grain. And by Old English, I mean until the 16th century, and actually in some parts of England, corn is still the word for grain. So the corn market, Kornmarkt in German, or corn market in English means grain. It just means grain, all grain, any kind of grain. It's the Old English word, Germanic word for grain. So when that translation of St. Augustine's City of God is referring specifically to grain. It's an old translation, because in England they don't use the word corn, they use the word maize, right? Which is why I try to be clear about that, saying maize is what was introduced, not corn, because corn has been around since forever. But that's why some people will read older texts and they'll assume, they see the word corn and they think, oh, well, of course medieval people had corn. No, they had grain. Yeah. Okay. Good question. Thank you, Shellback Bow. Okay, so we now have we now have to add a few raisins. So I have actually added only 3 egg yolks into this mixture. And now for raisins, it says a few. So I'm going to take that at face value, because there is a sauce that goes with this that has raisins in it as well. So I think the few raisins is probably just to sweeten it in a natural, flavorful way, instead of just adding sugar, which is just sweet, right? So what is a few raisins? Literally says a few raisins. Okay. Well, I guess I'm going to go with a few. Looks like about 20 raisins, maybe. 20 raisins, which isn't that many. Right, okay, so we have our egg yolks, a few raisins, a little old and new cheese, parsley, marjoram, and finely chopped mint, 2 egg whites, 1 egg white in this case, because we're doing less than I think the recipe probably calls for. You know, the wonderful thing about using granite mortars instead of probably the metal mortars, or maybe even wooden ones they would have used, you get fantastically buff forearms. Okay. Oh, wow. Look how yellow that's already turning just because of the saffron. Okay, we've got our mild spices have already been added. Cloves. Handsome, could you grab me the jar of cloves, please? Yes. I forgot about the cloves. Should have ground them in the... can't do that one. That one's wet now. Have to use the other little one.
Good thing I keep you well supplied in mortars.
Yeah. Okay, so it just says cloves. It doesn't say how many cloves.
I'm going to do 50.
Okay, so cloves are very pungent, and it doesn't take much in the way of cloves to flavor a dish. So not 50 probably. So I think we're going to go with maybe 4. And I mean, it does say, it just says, oh, it says a lot of cloves. Okay. Still only going to, I'm going to grind all of these, and I'm not going to put all of it in. I'm going to add it bit by bit. Because thing about cloves is they are an analgesic. They will, if your mouth hurts, if something in your mouth hurts, if you have a toothache, you've got some kind of sore, an ulcer or something, chew on a clove. Seriously, chew on a clove and it will make it go numb, because cloves are a very good analgesic. And in the Middle Ages, they actually used cloves as a topical analgesic when they were performing surgery, right? They actually had a variety of analgesics. So you had cloves as a topical analgesic, and they had poppy juice to put you under during surgery. Unfortunately, before the 19th century, before they discovered the alkaloid of morphine, the strength of poppy juice was very hard to regulate, because they couldn't tell if, how strong the poppy juice actually was, how much active ingredient, how much of the alkaloid morphine was actually in the poppy juice. And so it could be that it was super strong, and that by giving them too much, the person would go into a coma. There was actually a surgery manual from Salerno that says when you are performing surgery, give them poppy juice, but slap them every hour to make sure they do not sleep too deeply, because it seems, by that language, it tells me that they had patients go into a coma and not wake up. So, yes, they had analgesics for medieval surgery. They really did. It wasn't just people biting down and suffering through like this. I don't know when that started. I don't know why they stopped using poppy juice. I don't know why they stopped using the topical analgesics that they knew in the Middle Ages. No idea. But they used them. They had them and they used them. And they also knew that you could die if you use too much or it was the wrong strength. So their solution was to make sure you didn't end up in a coma by slapping you every hour during surgery. It's low tech, but it works. Sometimes low tech is just fine. Okay, so I'm going to actually put about half of these cloves in to start. So that would be about 3 cloves, I guess, worth. So I'm just going to write that down for now. 3 cloves. And now we're actually going to mix it all together with the mortar. Mortar is actually, or with the pestle. The pestle is actually extremely effective. Just going to see if I can give you a little bit more of a look. Unfortunately, it's so deep. This pestle is, or the mortar is, that I'd have to actually raise the camera a little bit so you can actually see inside. But it's a very effective item. So my technique is first to bash the hell out of anything that needs to be smushed, like the cheese, right? And at the same time, that's going to smush other things like the raisins and the yolks. My neighbors are probably approaching sleepy time, so I'm not going to pound with the same sort of ferocity that I might otherwise utilize in the execution of this task. But, if we lived in a single family home, I would definitely be doing a lot more violence to this particular filling. But you'd be amazed at how effective the mortar and pestle actually are for food processing. The other thing about using the mortar and pestle over a modern food processor is a different kind of action. A modern food processor utilizes blades that move at a very high speed and they generate heat. So that will actually impact the flavor and texture of the thing that is being mixed. If you are working with something like nuts, it can actually make the nuts go rancid, and so it'll give it an acrid flavor because of the heat of the blades. That's not going to happen with a mortar and pestle. So it's not just a question of speed. The texture and flavor will actually be impacted whether you use a modern food processor or if you use a mortar and pestle. Hanson? Mm-hmm. Are there any comments or questions?
So many that I have not been able to keep up.
Well, that's your whole job. You have one job, and it's to monitor the chat.
There are so many stripper names.
Oh, really? Oh. That's gonna be my community post. What would your medieval stripper name be? You think I'm joking? I'm not. So I also want to ensure that the raisins are all nice and blended in. And you know, the disadvantage, I've said it before, I'll say it again, the disadvantage of us recreating this recipe is that I've never been to 15th century Naples, and so I have never tried this dish, and I therefore don't know how it should actually taste. A 15th century person would probably have had this dish at some point or something like it. And so they would know how it should taste. They would know what texture it should have. They should know how it would look, right? But we don't know that because as far as I know, none of you are immortals or long-lived individuals. Okay. Tasting the mixture. It's definitely spicy. I feel like it actually needs more herbs, honestly. I feel like the cheese combination is interesting because, you know, provolone is a very, it's a very specific, it has a very prominent flavor, right? So I can definitely taste the provolone. The cream cheese is not really so overwhelming in flavor. The texture of the filling is nice. I feel like maybe it needs more herbs. Certainly the cloves are definitely there. I'm not, I wouldn't, the Sheriff of Muffingham? Muffington, nice. Handsome, come and taste. She wants you to play with her.
It's interesting.
What do you think? More herbs?
Not a clue.
Okay, well.
Okay, I'll speak for you.
Is it something you think you would like to eat? Let me put it that way.
Did you add the rose stuff?
Did I add the what?
Rose?
No. No, there's no rose in it at all. Nope. Actually, this is a recipe that does not involve rose water, shockingly.
There's an interesting floral taste. It's really strong.
That might be the mint.
Maybe.
Though I can't really taste the mint. You know, the interesting thing is that when almost any dish involving spices and herbs, I like to let it sit overnight because the flavors really meld really nicely. But there's nothing about letting this mixture cure overnight so that the flavors perfuse it more widely. Also, so it's got a decent yellow texture, but I don't really taste the saffron. So I think I might actually add more saffron. And then it will make it more yellow because the saffron doesn't just function in terms of making it, giving it a flavor. It also gives it a nice color. So I think maybe we want some more saffron. I think I also want more cinnamon. Could you bring me some more cinnamon, Handsome? Another cinnamon stick?
Another cinnamon stick.
Yes, please.
Great. Now they're all asking if they can call me Handsome.
Oh no, you've heard my secret name for him. Okay.
And she makes me walk around topless.
Sure I do. Okay. So here's, everyone, just so you know, if you have a mortar, it has to be dry if you're going to grind spices in it. Otherwise, it will just not work well. So I'm going to give this a rinse and then dry it. This is actually a replica medieval linen towel. I like linen towels a lot because linen, not terry cloth towels a lot because they dry really quickly. They don't get musty. They don't get mildewy. Terry cloth towels, as far as I can tell, didn't exist in the Middle Ages. I haven't seen any evidence of it anyway. All the extant towels we have, all of the depictions of towels, the records about how cloth was woven, it just doesn't seem like terry cloth was a thing. But especially in a moist place, that makes sense because terry cloth does not dry well in humid climates. It really doesn't. Handsome?
Yes.
Comments?
I don't know what a terry cloth is.
Oh, terry cloth. Terry cloth is the typical fluffy towel. Any typical fluffy Western hotel towel, that's terry cloth. The thick, fluffy, piled, that's called terry cloth. Medieval towels were not made of terry cloth, as far as we can tell. Okay, once more into the breach, more cinnamon. Cinnamon is actually the bark of the cinnamon tree, and you can literally eat the bark straight from the tree. I have actually been to Sri Lanka, and I have done that. It is delicious. Bark straight off of the tree is absolutely a delight that everyone should get to try at one point. The flavor is so strong, and it's so zesty, and it's sweet, and it's delicious. It is nature's candy. Cinnamon bark is nature's candy. Tamarind is also nature's candy. Tamarind is actually nature's Sour Patch Kids. I can eat tamarind straight all day. What, Handsome?
No cotton polyester.
No cotton polyester. God, no. No. Ugh, no. Linen. Linen for the win. Love my linen. Yeah, definitely no polyester. Okay, let's try this again. So the next thing we're going to have to consider in this recipe is the cooking. So it just says fry after we've stuffed the eggs, which we'll be doing as soon as I've adjusted the seasoning to where I feel like it's tasty. All right. And you know, here's the thing, like my use of provolone cheese may turn out to be a mistake. We'll find out. I like provolone cheese. I love provolone cheese. That doesn't mean it's necessarily the right cheese for this, right? Trying to find the right aged cheese, that's part of the challenge, right? I think if I don't like the provolone cheese, I would have had similar problems with the Parmesan cheese also. So we'll see. We'll see how it comes out in the end once we've adjusted all the spicing to whatever on earth it's actually supposed to be. And once we fried it, and there's also a sauce that goes with it. So you'll notice we haven't used all of the yolks. This version of the recipe does not have a sauce with it, but in one of the other cookbooks from this tradition, there is a sauce recipe that is provided that makes use specifically of the leftover yolks. And we will be looking at making that sauce if there is time. Otherwise, I might make the sauce tomorrow and do a second medieval cooking party tomorrow to demonstrate the making of the sauce to go with it. We'll see how this comes along. So now we have to decide about frying the eggs. It says to fry them gently in good oil. Good oil. Good oil could be olive oil in this case. Sometimes, though, in the Italian tradition, in the 15th century Italian tradition, oil could be lard. It could be tallow. All right, so we have to decide which of those ones we want to use. Honestly, I would hate to use olive oil for frying. Olive oil is expensive. And once you fry something in olive oil, you cannot reuse that oil because it's a monounsaturated fat. And heating it up to the temperature of frying means you probably should not reuse it. We also have to decide if we're supposed to deep fry them, if we're supposed to shallow fry them, right? So those are two different processes, shallow frying and deep frying. Deep frying would be faster, also slightly harder to control the temperature. Shallow frying would take a little longer, but it's easier to control the temperature of the oil, at least on a modern stove it is. Medieval hearth stove, for those who don't know, is basically, it's either on the ground or it's actually raised, but you build a fire, then you generally let the fire burn down to coals, and then you arrange your pots and pans either over top of the fire or near the fire or over the coals, or in some cases you put coals beneath your pot and you put a lid on it and you put the coals above. In some cases, if you're using a cauldron kind of pot, then that can be suspended from a chain hanging above the fire. There's a lot of different ways. A medieval hearth is actually extremely flexible because you can do a lot of different things at different temperatures at once by just segregating a space where the coals are and, putting hotter or cooler coals, larger or smaller flames, building the fire up, tamping the fire down, raising the pot, lowering the pot. So the medieval meant actually doing the cooking, not just the preparation, in a medieval kitchen actually required the cook to know how to manage the fire, how to manage the coals, how to, build a fire or tamp down a fire. And there would actually be someone in large kitchens, large professional kitchens in great houses. There would be someone whose sole job it was to manage the fire. To actually keep the fire going, to make sure there was always enough wood laid on, that sort of thing. But in a smaller household, then it was often, and especially a household that couldn't afford servants, then it was usually the women of the house who did everything like that. And so that included managing the fire. But in larger households, the cooks were usually men, especially the head cook. Yeah. See how much more time this takes in the smaller mortar than it does in the large one? I really do need to wear a mask. I'm going to develop lung cancer in 30 years. It's going to be from cinnamon inhalation.
Yeah, Tea with Tash says, in all serious, research cinnamon rolls. As I thought, it's a thing. It can be really dangerous for you.
Yep. Yeah, I've got a mask. Hold on a minute. You can hear me. Nope. Well. Yeah. I mean, happily, I only grind cinnamon once a week. Okay, I grind cinnamon a lot now, apparently.
Suwa is asking, what are you making?
Yes. Okay, so welcome to my medieval cooking show. We are actually in 15th century Naples today, and we are making a 15th century Italian stuffed egg recipe. I'm in the process of grinding cinnamon to go into our mixture. I'm going to call that good enough. Okay. Okay. Cinnamon grinding is done. Okay. It's funny, now that the spices have been sitting for a little while, I can tell that their flavors have developed quite nicely. Okay. The other nice thing about cinnamon is it's a natural sweetener because it has its own natural sugars. So by adding cinnamon to something, you are making it sweeter. I think maybe actually, I'm going to add some more raisins as well for a little more sweetness. Remember I said I'm an intuitive cook. So for those of you who are following our travel adventures, Travels with the Creative Contessa, my sister channel, on Monday night, Tuesday morning, Monday night Americas, Monday evening Americas, middle of the night Europe, Tuesday morning Seoul, I will be interviewing on the channel 2 friends who have been employed by the cruise industry in the customer interrelations area and the booking area for over 20 years each. And they are going to be sharing with us some of the insanity that passengers request when they are on a cruise. The things that people have asked for them to arrange, the outrageous behavior once on board. They're going to be spilling the tea. So if you are interested in the salacious happenings on board a cruise ship, both before the cruise sets sail and once it has departed, then tune into that. I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. I'll probably also end up talking about the stupid things I've seen tourists do with my own eyes. So if you're interested in that, check out Travels with the Creative Contessa. Otherwise, welcome to my medieval cooking party, everyone. Today we are in 15th century Naples, exploring a stuffed egg recipe that has been handed down to us with not enough instructions to actually really know what's happening. So we have to actually make a lot of guesses as to how much ingredients should go into it, what specific ingredients should go in, how it should be put together. And we're at the stage where we are mixing up the filling that will go into our empty egg whites. And after we reach what I would say a satisfactory flavor for this filling and stuff the egg whites, then we will be frying them in oil. We've just added some more raisins in to maybe help sweeten this, help temper the very assertive flavor of the provolone cheese that we put in here. I'm kind of concerned this might go the same way that cherry tort did, in which we used the sheep's cheese and the Parmesan cheese, and it went very badly.
I'm very worried.
Yeah, it went badly. Well, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Sometimes these things happen. Yeah, we ended up having to throw away that cherry cheesecake. It was very sad. Okay. And I think it might be a little dry, actually. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do what I said I might do, which is add another egg white into it. If you have any questions about daily life in the Middle Ages, about food in the Middle Ages, about medieval cookery, do let me know, everyone. One of the most common misconceptions people have about medieval food is that the rich people ate really well and the poor people starved. And both of those things are not true. The rich people had access to a lot of expensive food and they could eat a lot of food, but actually a lot of the food they ate was not nearly as nutritious as the food eaten by the people who couldn't afford the expensive food. So, for instance, the wealthy ate white bread because in the Middle Ages, that was the luxury bread of choice, was to be able to filter out, to sift out all of the bran, all of the germ, right? And have nothing but sweet, sweet, sweet white flour. Unfortunately, all of the micronutrients and fiber is in the bran. And so all they were eating was basically proto-sugar. And so, wealthy people were eating this diet that was extremely rich in very refined carbohydrates, whereas the people on the lower end of the spectrum couldn't afford that. So they actually had to eat bread that was whole grain. They couldn't afford wheat. Wheat was expensive. Rye was the grain of choice for most levels of society. So rye is actually, again, much more nutrient dense, has a much lower glycemic index. Their rye was whole grain instead of refined. So that meant that people on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, which is to say like 80% of the population, the bottom 80%, they ate whole grain sourdough bread instead of white bread, instead of pain de main. So yeah, it's very interesting how also the wealthy people tended to eat a lot of meat, and not much in the way of vegetables. Whereas people on the lower end of the spectrum, they ate a lot of pulses. They ate a lot of root vegetables. They ate a lot of herbs. I mean, spices are actually also micronutrient dense, but they actually ate a much more balanced diet than the wealthy did. And I know some of you have heard me say this before, I'll say it again. There was a meta study done relatively recently that found that the average meat consumption of the lower classes in the Middle Ages was actually 32 kilograms of meat per year. By the 19th century, it had dropped to 19 kilograms per year, showing once again that the poverty associated with the Middle Ages is actually the poverty of the modern world and the not very long ago modern world. No, they didn't have rubber scrapers in the Middle Ages, but I cannot bring myself to use my finger to do this. We've said it before. We'll say it again. I would probably, in a medieval kitchen, I would pay someone to be the bowl scraper because probably you're supposed to use your fingers and nope, not for me. Thank you. So yes, here I am indeed utilizing a rubber scraper, but it's because I can't contemplate the alternative. Not my thing. Yeah, here we go. Some of you have been asking. That's actually improving. Handsome? I need your taste.
Oh. I got a raisin.
Oh, I'm sorry. That probably means I need to smush it more. Okay, but what about the flavor outside of the raisin? You don't like it? It's okay. So there is a sauce that is supposed to go with this, and the sauce consists of egg yolks, spices, verjuice, and wine syrup. And actually, I probably won't be able to make this tonight because I have to make the wine syrup. So wine syrup is basically just wine that's been cooked down until it's really thick and syrupy. And I'm pretty certain that would make a really delicious sauce. You know, it's funny, a lot of these recipes call for cheese, and sometimes I think to myself, it would actually, and I hesitate to say this because I'm a cheese lover. Are you all cheese lovers? I'm a major cheese lover. Cheese is a food group for me. So for me to say, I actually think it would be better without the cheese is an honest thought. Contrary to popular belief, maybe cheese doesn't make everything better. But again, it could be that I just need to find the right cheese. I honestly think that a cheese that is maybe not as nutty flavored as provolone is, because provolone and Parmesan share that quality, right? They're both very nutty. They're both very assertive. By the way, I see a lot of you have, but if you're enjoying this live stream, don't forget to double tap that screen. And if you're wondering what the hell is going on, welcome to the 15th century. We are making a 15th century Neapolitan stuffed egg recipe, meaning a recipe from Naples. Yeah, I bet maybe, I'm trying to think, an Italian cheese that's not assertive.
So brie, mozzarella.
Brie is not Italian. Would not have been, as far as I know, was not available in Italy. Yeah, mozzarella maybe. You know, the problem is maybe mozzarella, maybe. Unfortunately, we're already committed. We already have the provolone here, so we're proceeding apace. I still need to find out. I still need to find out if provolone actually existed in this era. I still need to find out if mozzarella actually existed. Again, we just can't assume that because something might be relatively simple, that it is the same way that it was done 600 years ago. We should never assume that. Humans are infinitely creative and are always looking for ways to improve our processes. And sometimes those process improvements actually impact the flavor and texture of the product. So we should never assume that something has existed for this long. Were you just waving at me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kayla asked, I'd heard they preserved the top of the bread loaf for the nobles. That's where the phrase upper crust, meaning high society, appeared. Real or myth?
Yes. So real or myth? The question is whether the term upper crust comes from the idea that it was the nobility who ate the upper crust of bread. So I have also heard this not myth. I've heard this statement. And while I have not actually found any primary source to back that up per se, I can tell you that in a medieval oven, medieval ovens worked thusly. To heat a medieval oven, you would build a massive fire in the oven and it would burn until the oven reached temperature. And then they would actually scrape out the fire and the oven would retain the heat for hours and hours and hours and bake, right? There was no real way to adjust the temperature downward. You just had to wait for it to cool down enough to reach a temperature that was the temperature you needed. But this also meant that the loaves actually went straight onto the oven. And so the oven could have ash left over on it. And so the bottom crust did tend to have ash baked into it, which meant that in some cases, the bottom crust was absolutely cut off. We know this because we have in the 15th century book of carving, the 15th century English manual on how to take care of your sovereign, how to be a good man, a good valet, a good servant. It actually talks about preparing the trenchers for the table, and it does talk about cutting off the bottom crust. So now, of course, it then talks about cutting off the bottom crust and using that as the trencher, and then the top part of the bread gets eaten. The trencher, the wooden trencher, is then not eaten by the people at the table. No, no, no. That is then offered to the poor, generally the poor of the parish, the poor of the community, who will often, they will line up outside of the door to the kitchens of the palace or the manor house or the castle, and they will then get fed. They will get given the leftovers from the feast or the banquet or the dinner or the meal, and they will also get given the bottom crust, the trenchers. So it seems like a likely etymology. I just don't know when that phrase actually arose. The process that would have led to that phrase was indeed something that was done in the Middle Ages. I just don't know when people started saying top crust or bottom crust, right? I don't know when that actually came around. That phrasing itself could actually have been a Victorian invention based on their understanding of medieval life. I'm not certain about that, but I do know that the process that captures, the idea that captures, is absolutely certainly reflective of medieval practices. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's take a taste of
the OED. Earliest evidence for upper crust is from before 1475.
But it doesn't say what it is.
Page is still loading.
Oh.
In the writings of John Russell, author or compiler of a manual of household.
Yes, that's what I was just talking about. But I don't think he refers to people as the upper crust. He's referring to the physical upper crust. Exactly what I was just saying. This is actually starting to grow on me a little bit. It's less repulsive than it was. Adding more to it, making it moister, was a good choice. I might also, I think I'm going to add some more herbs also. Okay.
Maybe it's the saffron that is the floral taste. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe it's the cinnamon. I'm going to add some more parsley. You can never go wrong with more parsley, in my opinion. So wait, it's the floral taste, not the cheese taste?
I don't know. You know, my sense of taste is all about. Oh, and Tea with Josh thinks it'd be interesting to have a live about sex work in the Middle Ages, about sex in general during the Middle Ages.
Oh yeah, just to talk about sex, because I'm not a demonstration, right? Yeah, I mean, we can talk about sex work now if we want. I think, in a lot of places, medieval Europe in general, across medieval Europe, this is true. There was a conflicted relationship between sex workers and the society that they served. But they were sex workers were regarded as this is not me being judgmental, this is the attitude of the time, as a necessary evil. Right? Because the idea was that they wanted there was a concern that if there weren't sex workers, then men, being men, would just start kidnapping other people's women and, engaging in non-consensual activity with them. So the idea of sex workers as a kind of social safety valve was common. That was how sex workers were viewed. But their activities were very restricted. Where they could practice their trade was depended from polity to polity. There were usually specific neighborhoods, hence the origin of the red light districts, right? They had to wear specific clothes, but contrary to popular belief, medieval sex workers didn't wear skimpy clothes. Quite the opposite. In most places, they had to wear more clothes than other people, and they had to wear specific kinds of clothes that looked a certain way. And I don't mean by shape, I mean coloration. So for instance, in England, sex workers had to wear a rayed hood, a striped hood. And I think it was in one statute, it was mentioned as being white and black. And so sometimes they had to wear bells. So sex workers would have been easily identifiable. And if they were caught not abiding by those rules, there were serious fines. Sometimes they would have to, serve time in the stocks and the pillory. There was also a connection, unfortunately, between the bathhouses and sex workers, because sex workers realized that a good place to find clients was the bathhouses. And so some bathhouses have developed a reputation as being nothing but basically a kind of brothel. So, that's one of the reasons that when the Reformation happened, a lot of the bathhouses got closed down in the Reformation in Protestant states, because they viewed bathhouses as just being a place of sin rather than a place where people got clean. So, yeah, sex work is a very interesting topic. In Florence, Florence had a reputation. Medieval Florence, 14th and 15th century Florence, had such a reputation for its homosexual male population and for having a lot of homosexual men, that the word for engaging in male homosexual intercourse was to Florentine. That was a verb in many languages. But Florence actually acknowledged that this was a problem. This is not a myth. This was not a myth or a slur. This was a real truth that Florence itself acknowledged. And God bless them, they really didn't understand what homosexuality was. They thought that homosexuality was the consequence of these poor young men just not having access to women. Because in Florence, good Florentine women were not supposed to engage in sexual activity, right? Proper, modest women, you weren't supposed to do that. You were supposed to remain pure until your marriage. So Florence thought, we just need to make professional sex workers available to them, women, and it will ungayify them. So Florence actually opened up in the early 15th century a series of very tightly regulated public brothels. How fun is that? It didn't work, in case you're wondering. That was not the reason that these... What was the comment or question?
Did women have a sex education before marriage?
No. Sex education in Western Europe anyway? No. No, most women had no idea. Now, okay, so women, depending on your status, right? Women who worked on farms knew how sex worked because they saw the animals, right? They knew. Proper bred ladies who lived in the cities and towns, who lived in castles and didn't actually get out into the areas where the livestock did their thing, they generally didn't have a clue. And this actually comes across in certain writings. Hints of it are hinted at, especially in the case where, say, a prince and princess don't conceive in a suitable amount of time. And then the chroniclers write about it, and it turns out that in some cases, neither the bride nor the groom had an idea. So it wasn't just a question of the women not getting sexual education. Some men didn't either. And so if they didn't actually have access to a lady of the night before their marriage, in some cases, they didn't know either. And so it ended up being two completely ignorant idiots basically doing goodness knows what, but not the right thing, and not having children, not conceiving children. So no, sex education, absolutely not a thing, which could end up in a very unfortunate situation for a woman, as you can imagine. Yeah. You know, I think we talked about this in a recent stream where there used to be this women in certain places in the West used to be taught that if you kiss a boy, you'll get pregnant. And so that means that some girls literally thought, some young women thought that as long as they didn't kiss the boy, they'd be fine. Well, that's just not how it works, is it? Okay, so I have added in I did add in the parsley, right? I got talking. Yeah, more parsley definitely lightened the flavor. I think it's doing a better job of counterbalancing the provolone. Okay, well, I'm going to say that we doubled the amount of parsley. 30 grams of parsley. Trying to decide if I want some more mint too. I feel like I might want some more mint as well. Happily, I have more mint. Okay, let me see. Goodness gracious. Missed. Oh, goodness. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, everyone, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, I'm just grabbing some more mint, but I'm still mic'd so you all can hear me, no problem. Just have to remember in which of my many drawers I put the mint. There it is. Thank goodness for larders. Let's see. Oh, so yes, I have read Guns, Germs, and Steel, but I will tell you that his theories are outdated. So if you actually look into, I mean, it seems very convincing at the outset until you realize that there's a lot that's left out. So Guns, Germs, and Steel, very interesting read. But if you really start reading peer review by other historians, you realize that there's a lot left out of his argument. And his theories are at this point very outdated. So yeah, I have read it. I was very convinced when I read it. And now I realize it's more complex than he makes it out to be. Although some of the points he makes are still valid, you know. Oh, let me see. Great question, Hannah. Damn it. Where was Hannah's question? Oh, there it is. When it came to infertility, how did that affect couples? Were they treated differently from other more fertile families? Also, when was there something like adoption back then? So if we're talking about Western Europe, it's not a monolith. So adoption, and it's not a monolith across the 1,000 years. Sometimes, I mean, in the ancient Roman Empire, for instance, adoption happened all the time. Julius Caesar adopts his nephew, Octavian, adopts him as his son. And so Octavian becomes Caesar's heir. So, it depends on when and where you are. Adoption in Florence. So I haven't heard about adoption as such, like the way we would view it now. There were orphans, but it doesn't seem like it was all the rage to go to an orphanage and get yourself a child. Infertility, if a couple was infertile, then they just relied on other branches of the family to carry it on. In general, in medieval Europe, it seems like. In Ireland's a different place, and I'm not an expert. I'm only peripherally knowledgeable about medieval Ireland. I wish Philip were here. He's not I'll ask him in our next medieval buzz about adoption in medieval Ireland, because I think that that was more commonplace there, to actually adopt someone as your, specifically, usually sons, usually daughters, not so much. But yeah, in medieval Florence, I haven't really read much about adoption. Now, what does happen in medieval Florence is that if a man has a natural child, as they are called, no, if a man has a natural child with a woman, not his wife, and very often that man will raise that child as his legal son. And the woman he marries will actually be expected to raise that child like her own, basically. So that's not necessarily the kind of adoption you were talking about. But in medieval Florentine society and Renaissance Florentine society, the status of a child was determined by the status of their father. So that also means that in the case, I've mentioned this a couple of days ago, and I'll mention again, we actually have records from 15th century Florence of a black slave couple having a child, a baby, and the father actually goes to the orphanage of the Ospitali degli Innocenti, the Hospital of the Innocents, and he drops the baby off to the orphanage because he's the baby's father, but he doesn't say that. He doesn't acknowledge he's the father, but it's recorded and it's implied. And he's black. I don't mean tan. I don't mean mildly brown. I mean, he's recorded as being African black, sub-Saharan African black. And he and his and the mother of the baby, I don't remember if they were married or not. I actually think they may have been, but it didn't matter. They wanted the baby to have a better shot at a good life than they had. And it was known, they both knew, that the father of the baby is what would determine the baby's status. So by giving the baby up from adoption, the baby didn't have a father. The baby was a free man, would not be a slave. Because in Florence, it wasn't about the color of your skin. It was about your actual legal status. And so they actually sacrificed their child to give their child a better life. And they knew that's what would happen. And it did. Indeed, the child was raised in the orphanage and was given an education and basically became an employee of the orphanage, had a much better life and was free, was a free person, was free to, had self-determination, basically. And the interesting thing about this is that it's recorded that the slave's owner actually authorized this. The slave's owner authorized him to give up their baby for adoption. So the slave's owner wasn't interested in perpetuating the chattel slavery. He could have, he was giving up a potential asset to his household. But it's recorded in this record that he authorized the man to give up the baby for adoption, which I thought was a really interesting insight into 15th century Florence. And I know that's not really what you're asking about adoption, but I really haven't read any references to adoption actually happening. In general, when orphans get given up like that, they may have been, but I haven't read of accounts of that. It seems they get raised in the orphanage, they get educated, they get job training, and then they usually become employees staff within the monastic community, because usually these orphanages are operated by monastic communities, monastic orders of some kind. And sometimes they take orders, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just become lay members of the community. That was a good question. I'll have to see if I can find better answers, because just in my reading of chronicles and about family interactions, it's funny that's never really cropped up. That was a good one. I like that. Good question, guys. Gosh, I hope I was talking and not really paying attention. Oh, good, I did put it in the mortar. Yay, my lizard brain did the right thing.
T says, I wonder if adoptions were done in the dark, quote unquote.
Yeah,
Go to a nunnery and get a child and no one knows. That's something that I know was done in Portugal and Brazil until recently.
Yeah, absolutely, Tosh. That is absolutely an option, that maybe babies were acquired in secret. And goodness knows that later on in the 17th century, for instance, very often if a political faction wants to delegitimize the king. For example, James II, they will claim that the baby that is the heir to the kingdom, the new crown prince, is not actually theirs, that it is in fact an orphan from an orphanage or something like that. So we know that those kinds of accusations were made. How reflective that is of the reality of, people secretly getting children. If it's not recorded, it's not recorded, right? And that kind of, you have to take political slander like that, obviously, with like a ton of salt, not even a grain. So if you're just joining, welcome to my medieval cooking party, where we reconstruct original medieval recipes, and I hold forth on a huge variety of topics, a huge array of topics about life in the Middle Ages. If you're enjoying, please double tap that screen. Okay, so I have added more mint. Here is what it looks like now. This is what the filling looks like. It's quite nice. It's got a nice consistency, so it, holds its own shape, which is good for frying. We don't want it just leaking out everywhere. Yeah, I think that's made it more something, more better. I think that's tempered the very strong flavor of the provolone. Okay, so now we are at what I would call the stuffing phase. So it says now we need to fill up the hollows. Yeah, fill up the hollows and fry the eggs gently in oil. So I also need to make that decision about the oil. And also we have to decide whether we're going to deep fry them or shallow fry them. I think we should shallow fry them. I don't think they should be deep fried. One, we're not battering them in anything. And two, the side, it's open and it's much easier to control a filled egg that's open on one half if you're shallow frying than if you are deep frying. So I think we're going to go with shallow frying. Wait, let me check the Italian. Let me check the Italian and see, because there's different words for frying, deep fry. There's sometimes different words for deep frying or shallow frying. 149. Okay, let's see. Okay, it says, e questa tale composizione miscola tutta insieme cum safrano. We did that. E ponela nel loco dei cavati rossi e fa friggere in buono olio pian piano. Okay, friggere. That kind of more has the implication of deep frying, but it's not necessarily deep frying. It could still be like shallow frying with a lot of oil, but not enough that it's just completely floating around like donuts. Yeah, I just feel like it could go really bad if we deep fry it, like really seriously, completely deep fry it with no batter. No batter or no breading, and it definitely doesn't call for that. Okay, what do you think? Should we shallow fry it or should we deep fry it? Let me know what you think while I get the, we're definitely not doing this in olive oil, while I get out the tallow that I'm going to use. And pop that in. So again, we're going to be...
Does the wooden pestle wear down?
That's a good question. Yes, so the wooden pestle will eventually start wearing. Depends on how much really hard, how many really hard things we use. Yeah, it will start wearing down, but not quickly. It will take years. Unless I used it every day for like hours and hours a day, but I don't. So at my pace of wear and tear, it will probably take years. In a medieval kitchen, obviously they would have been using it all day, every day. And the pestles that have survived in the archaeological record, the ones that have been discarded, granted they have rotted somewhat, but even still, they wear down. So eventually they do, yeah, for certain.
Shallow fry seems to be the most voted on.
Yeah, I think I agree. I feel like shallow fry is the way to go. And yeah, friggere, I think it just implies that there's more oil than just enough to keep it from sticking to the bottom. So we're going with that. I have a feeling I would be crying with, the yolk float, the stuffing floating around separately from the eggs in a deep frying vat
So are there any
situation.
sex books or sex manuals that you know
From medieval Europe, sex manuals from medieval Europe. Let me think about that. I can't think of any offhand. What we do have, we have books on courtly love. We have a manual on courtly love from the 12th century that some people claim is just supposed to be satire. Other people take it a bit more seriously. We have health manuals. We have a book of gynecology called the Trotula from Salerno from the 12th century, and that gets copied and dispersed all throughout Europe up until the 16th century. And it talks about issues that you can have that might impede sex, specifically from a reproductive sense. But I don't personally know of any manuals about sex or any kind of instructional thing. Something certainly nothing like the Kama Sutra. I can't think of anything like that in medieval Europe, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I haven't encountered it yet. So there could be, but I can't think of anything offhand. Now that's a good question, but no.
surprised the French don't have a sex book.
They didn't need one, they just knew. No, I mean, so, the reality is that, medieval France gets a reputation as the center of lovemaking, mostly because of the romances, right? The knightly romances, the Arthurian romances, in fact, which, people think originate in France, but, they're actually, many of those tales are actually like Welsh in origin. So, or Old English in origin. So that's pretty funny how they then get spread back into France. But it's the whole courtly love culture, right? So in Aquitaine in the 11th century and into the 12th century, Aquitaine is very close to Moorish Spain, by the way, to Al-Andalus, and very influenced by it, I should add. And so they had much more of a, how shall I put this? Free love culture. Eleanor of Aquitaine's father was a known rake. He was a known philanderer, and he lived an outrageous life, which really tells us a lot about why Eleanor was the way she was. Right? She grew up in a very vibrant, liberated court, shall we say, in the early 12th century. So I guess they just didn't feel the need to write manuals about it because they just did it.
When it comes to cooking, what meats were most popular? Did they prefer to farm and hunt, and is vegetarianism well documented back then?
Those are all good questions. Let's take it one at a time. What's the first question? The first of the series.
And
Yeah.
what meats were most popular?
What meats were most popular? Okay. So beef was what was most popular is not quite the same thing as necessarily what was most eaten. Beef was extremely popular. Pork was extremely popular. Pork appears in a lot of recipes. Pork appears in a lot of recipes almost as a seasoning because it's often used as salted pork. And so that's cured pork, and it adds a lot of flavor to a dish. Chicken appears a lot, but beef is not something that you could really just eat all the time necessarily, because oxen were work animals. Cows produced milk. So you wouldn't just want to be slaughtering cows all the time. Generally, cows were only slaughtered once a year, generally, I say, at the end of the year. Why am I using this? This is the wrong, I want to demonstrate using a medieval thing. They were generally used at the end of the year, towards the end of the year, when it was about time to winter, and they had to calculate how many animals they could get through the winter with the stored up fodder for the winter, right? In the northern places where they actually had a real winter. But yeah, beef makes an appearance. Chicken makes a very frequent appearance. Mutton, kid all make frequent. I'm not certain I could say what is the most popular. It's
Pork was really easy.
pork makes an appearance a lot. They definitely eat a lot of pork. Recipes that we actually have some recipes in this cookbook that are clearly Persian in origin, but they have pork lard or larded pork or salted pork added to them. So that's like clearly not originally not from the original Persian rendering, you know. So yeah, hunting was the purview of the wealthy pretty much uniquely. Hunting was dangerous, especially hunting something like wild boar. And that hunting wild boar, that was absolutely the purview of some crazy nobleman, right? Because to hunt a wild boar, to kill the boar, you generally have to get close in to execute the coup de grace. So that means that you are risking being gored by the boar. And if you get gored, you're probably not going to die immediately unless you're fortunate and the boar actually gets one of your arteries. Otherwise, you're just going to die slowly from sepsis as your intestines slowly rot in your body. Yeah, hunting was very, very popular amongst the aristocracy. It was considered the choice for aristocrats. Depending on where and when you were in medieval Europe, you might not be allowed to hunt unless you're an aristocrat. You know, that's the whole theme of the folk version of Robin Hood, right? Is he's a poacher. And he's poaching they're in the forest poaching the king's deer. So, you know, that was a very real thing. That isn't just something that happened in, you know, the Robin Hood tales. Fish were extremely, extremely popular and extremely common. Saltwater fish, freshwater fish, river fish, lake fish, farmed fish even. They had fish ponds back then for farming fish. Eel is one of the most popular fish in the Middle Ages, by the way. Now, could everyone afford it? No, but it was still very highly coveted. Vegetarianism, yes, a lot of medieval people ate a pescatarian diet for over 120 days a year. Medieval Christians did, because according to the medieval calendar, you could not eat meat or, in some cases, eggs or cheese on Lenten days, on Ember days, on certain saints' days. Right. So I think I calculated it's like 134 days a year or something like that when medieval people could not eat those things. So they could eat fish. Fish was allowed. But basically, other than that, they ate a vegan diet. So they couldn't eat butter even. They could eat almond milk, but they could eat a fake almond butter. It's not almond butter like we know it. It's basically thickened almond milk turned into a spread so that it kind of worked like butter. So yeah, there are definitely vegan options, not just vegetarian, but vegan options from medieval cookbooks because it was built into their diet. Now, they came up with as the Middle Ages wore on, you know, and the church and churchmen, you know, at the upper levels especially, kind of got increasingly further away from the actual message of Christ. They started coming up with crazy interpretations of those rules. For instance, a fish was anything that lived in the water. So that could include waterfowl, that could include beavers. So yeah. Martin Luther was not completely wrong when he posted his 95 Theses. Seriously, he had some good ideas. And for some of those, the Catholic Church later adopted them, ironically. Okay, so here are our stuffed eggs. I'm going to do the thing I really don't like doing, but it's really the best way to get the nicest look. I'm going to use my finger to smooth the filling out.
Evidently, Ayla is actually a Dartmoor farmer.
Oh, very cool, Ayla. That's awesome. So wait, do you work for the university? Oh wait, Dartmoor, not Dartmouth.
Yeah, Dartmoor.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Bringing the sheep down to the lowland farms, and I swear their one aim in life is to be difficult or die as creatively as possible.
Yeah, sheep are like toddlers, right? Like sheep are like toddlers. They're suicide machines. I mean, if you know, most people, do you actually use a crook, a shepherd's crook? A lot of people don't. The medieval shepherd's crook, especially, a lot of people don't understand how that actually worked. They don't get the idea that the crook was actually for literally, you know, these sheep would end up on the sides of cliffs And so they would have to use the shepherd's crook to actually lift them off of the cliffs.
Good night, Shellback Bow.
Good night, Shellback Bow. Thank you for joining us. Okay.
Bad smell. I did not like smell.
I have had snail. We have had escargot. I like it. Ryan doesn't.
Evidently, Tea with Tosh is going to go live with Ayla and farm.
Oh, cool. That's it. The creative Contessa, bringing people together. Okay, so I have ended up with a lot more filling than we had room in the eggs. But that is also often what happens with deviled eggs. So I'll think about if there's something I can do with the rest of this. The oil is coming to heat. I'm going to get tongs for this because I prize my fingers. And I have seen tongs mentioned in kitchen inventories from the 14th and 15th century. So that is a thing that they had. Okay, I'm going to reposition some things so that you can watch me try to burn myself. Okay. Oh, you never drained my tea for me.
Oh, I forgot about it.
Okay. Now I have oversteeped jasmine tea.
I want an ancient tzatziki recipe.
Oh, an ancient tzatziki recipe?
It says it's a family-run farm and focus on regenerative mixed farming.
Ooh, that's super
And
cool.
they do use a crook.
That is super awesome. I love it.
To have hurt them without one, especially the wee lambs.
Yeah, little lambs. Oh, Ayla, that is so cool. I'm so excited for you. Do you enjoy the life? Do you enjoy the lifestyle? You know, it's a lot of work. People who haven't worked on farms don't understand how much hard work it is. I grew up working on a working horse farm, not a pleasure farm. It was a racing farm. And I was up at the crack of dawn, took care of the horses, let them out, cleaned their stalls, trained them, groomed them, put them back out.
She's too distracting. That's why I forgot to do the tea.
Oh, so sweet, handsome. Okay, so they are cooking now.
We have border collies, but the train is super rugged and they get stuck sometimes. The sheep, not the dogs.
So I'm going to go ahead and flip one of these over and see what happens. Just gonna do it.
Do it.
Gonna give it a try. We'll see. We will see. We'll see what happens here. Let me see. I can't. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I thought the pot was a little more in camera. It was not. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I ordered my food 4 hours ago. And we've only been on 2 hours.
What is someone just now getting around to eating their meal?
None. Because the cooking on a live stream always takes forever.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if we were just making this, it'd be done.
Yeah, seriously, cooking on the live stream takes forever because I'm talking to you guys. Yeah, okay. So, lesson learned. You need to place it down. You should definitely place it in the pot, just straight down, face down. Otherwise, it just kind of gets all... Yeah. Okay. I should have realized that. That's on me. Well, I can refill these, actually. I have enough filling. I have enough extra filling that I can actually just refill these and reuse these egg whites. Yeah, so key is, it seems you really should put them down, face down. I'm going to actually turn the heat off of this because it's a clay pot, and clay pots retain their heat for quite a while.
Watching you is the new.
Is that what you said?
No, somebody else did.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that. Oh, so sweet. Whew. Okay. Yeah, that got a little oily.
We know rubber tongues aren't medieval.
Yeah, actually, these are silicone. But yeah, I have metal tongs, but I don't know where they went. Someone keeps washing them and putting them in strange places, and then I never find them again. Where are the metal tongs? What did you do with the metal tongs? I prefer these anyway because they're longer, actually, and they have a much flatter, more manipulable surface. Okay.
And evidently the spice rack is lined.
The spice rack.
He showed it when he moved the stuff aside.
Which spice rack?
Back there.
Really? Oh, that's that. Don't look at that. That's not our nice spice rack. In storage back in our house in Mississippi are actual medieval spice jars with hand calligraphed in 15th century script labels for each of the jars, little replica medieval spice jars. I miss that. Someday I'll be able to use it again. Okay, well, the later ones seem to be doing better, which is kind of standard. That now, if I had used,
Lucy Cat sent you
if,
jewels.
oh, Lucy Cat, thank you, appreciate that. If I really wanted to be truly sumptuous about this, I bet it would be real tasty cooked in butter. Yeah, so the later one, this one definitely turned out much more nicely. It's still very hot, so yeah, this one turned out much more nicely. I'm not going to put it in my hands. By the way, if you have a wooden cutting board, oil it after you wash it. Oil the cutting board after you wash it, please. Yeah. Especially this one, which is olive wood. Yeah, definitely place it down, face down first, let the heat seal it, then flip it, and then let the residual heat cook it up through the white. That definitely seems to be the winning approach. Yeah, I might scrape these other ones out, these failed ones. Here, I'll show you. It's now just like mostly grease on the inside. I might scrape those out and redo them because I can do it, because I've got a whole bunch of filling left in this mortar.
Yep, basically fried deviled eggs.
Yep, they're basically fried deviled eggs, except I was trying to find out what the definition of a deviled egg is, what makes it deviled.
I think it is the egg.
I think it's the paprika, actually. So really, this is just stuffed eggs, because there is no paprika, because there was no paprika in medieval Europe. There were no chili peppers in medieval Europe, Asia, or Africa.
Makes weird noises.
Yeah, the oil is making alarming noises. That is a fact. Okay, let's see. Yeah, shallow frying or deep frying can be dangerous, so, you know, tongs for the win. Okay. Okay, well, let's arrange our pretty guys over here. Okay. Smells nice. So it says to serve them. When they are fried, serve them. Now, so obviously this is supposed to be something that is served while it's warm. Let's see if I can. There we go. There you can see them there. Okay, just arranging them in a nice little, don't look at these. Don't look at the failed ones. Look at these ones. Okay, so they look quite nice. Yeah, you can definitely see there was a learning curve on, you know, how to place them in the pot, how long to cook them. It seems that probably about 5 minutes on each side is probably the way to go. I had the heat on low because I didn't want it to be too hot. If your oil gets too hot, then you're going to burn the outside and the inside won't cook. And remember, we have raw egg whites here. Not that that is actually as much of a big deal as people tend to think it is. But of course, if your oil is too cool, If your oil is too cool, then your food will absorb a lot of oil and then it will get greasy. So I can't eat these quite yet because they are still too hot. So I will give them a try in a little bit and I will let you know how they're going to go. And it is definitely too late to get started on that sauce because I still have to make the wine syrup for that sauce. But I have a sneaking suspicion that these will really be best when paired with that sauce because the sauce involves verjuice and I don't have verjuice. I'll have to use lemon juice or something like that, unfortunately. Wine syrup, and I think the egg yolks are actually basically ground up into it, and so the leftover egg yolks will act like a thickener. So I'm pretty certain that that will be a pretty tasty combo to go on top of this, and I think it will also help temper the cheese flavor. So I will probably make that sauce tomorrow and give it a try, and I will let you know how it goes, everyone. And I might, if I'm feeling froggy, I might live stream it. That'll probably, if I do that, it'll probably be tomorrow morning. On the other hand, I need a break from live streaming. I've done a lot of live streaming this weekend. For those who missed it, yesterday I had live medieval story time, and I read the super body tale from day 9, the 6th novel of the Decameron that involves mistaken identities and people getting it on with each other all together in the middle of the night, and the cat threw down somewhat. So if you want to check that out, check out that recording from yesterday. It's a pretty funny story. And of course, as always, after I read the story, we go back through it and I explain all of the little details. We explain what's going on, what the medieval world was like, and why that then impacts how the story goes. Okay, yes, questions?
Billy Elliott says, I saw you with that medieval Irish guy. You were a great teacher.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that, Billy. Yeah, that's Philip from Irish Medieval History.
We've all talked about how much we like Scotch eggs. They're 18th century, so.
Yeah, sorry, I have not yet found a medieval equivalent of Scotch eggs, although this is like the egg section. So there's some very interesting egg recipes here. For instance, they actually have any of you done the egg in cup trick in a microwave? There's actually an egg in cup recipe here. Egg in cups. Get fresh eggs, get a cup or a bowl, grease it with butter, break the eggs into it, sprinkle them with sugar, cinnamon, and salt, cover with another bowl, put it on hot coals, and they will cook quickly. Then you could put orange juice or verjuice on top. Orange juice is more like lemon juice. It's not sweet in this era at all.
Is it like ponzu?
Yeah, ponzu is what like ponzu? Orange juice?
Verjuice.
Verjuice. No. No. Verjuice is literally unripe green grape juice.
There you go, Takeda. No.
Yeah. So verjuice is literally like unripe green grape juice. And the ponzu I've had is not like verjuice. Yep. So the egg in cups, it's like the medieval microwave is putting something in a container, covering with a bowl and surrounding it in coals. That's the medieval microwave. So they literally have egg in cup. So that's like the medieval fast food, right? I just thought that was so cool that that's in here in this cookbook. Let me see. There was a Florentine style, not those eggs. Where was it? Oh, there's another. Yeah, we've already tried the other stuffed egg recipe, and we really liked that one, right? That was the first one we made, Handsome. Remember the eggs in the eggs? Oh, yeah. Eggs with eggs. That was actually super tasty. Yeah. Oh no, this is a different one. Oh, this one's crazy. Listen to this one. Florentine style stuffed deep fried eggs. So, let me see, the Florentine style stuffed eggs. Right. Okay. So make deep fried eggs as above, but not too cooked. Then from one side, remove all of the yolks one by one. So basically you fry the eggs. To fry the eggs Florentine style, you get fresh eggs, break them one by one into very hot oil, quickly push them inward with a spatula, making them as circular as you can. So to make those nice egg discs. Then turn them often so they take on a little color and are not too hard or too cooked on the inside, but still soft. So make those eggs and then take the yolks out one by one, get grated cheese, aged cheese, mint, parsley, marjoram, raisins, pepper, and 4 of the egg yolks. And depending on the quantity you want to make, mix everything together and refill the eggs through the hole with this filling. Set them to fry again until it is likely that the filling is cooked. Then take them out and garnish them with verjuice or oranges with a little ginger and serve. All right, so there's some pretty complex recipes here, but I have sadly not seen anything about wrapping a boiled egg in a sausage mixture and frying it. Sadly, sadly, sadly. Yep, but and in fact, the sausage recipes, there are sausage recipes in this collection, and they are hard summer smoked sausages. They are not nice soft raw meat sausages. No, no, no. They're super salty. Super salty. 10 for 10 pounds of meat, half a pound of salt. Super salty. And you stuff the casings, you let them cure overnight, and then you smoke them hard. So it's definitely summer sausage. It is not the nice sausage, breakfast sausage like we all have come to love. Okay, everyone. Any final questions? I'm going to when these. Nope, not there yet. They're still retaining their heat. I don't feel like burning my mouth. So once these reach a cooler temperature, I will try them. And then tomorrow or the day after, maybe even, I will make the sauce to go with them, utilizing the rest of our egg yolks. And I will, because I think I have to get some more lemon juice because I used all the lemon juice making lemon bars 2 days ago. So yeah, need more lemon juice. Okay, any final questions or comments before we part ways? You can see here hopefully you can see here on one side we have the successes, on the other side we have the sad failures. Yeah. Questions or comments?
Because of the price of gas, everyone's going to have jack legs in 2027, so hose will be making a comeback.
Yes, that is true. Medieval hosen for the win. Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
We
Well,
talked about eggs on the shelf.
Okay. Well, everyone, I would like to thank my channel members and my patrons on Patreon and my Facebook subscribers for financially supporting my mission to explore medieval daily culture, to recreate it, and to share my learnings and that process with you all, and to disabuse the world of the terrible misconceptions about the Middle Ages in doing so. If you're interested in supporting my work and you would like access to extra benefits and perks, dozens of hours of extra footage, of extra tutorials, of videos I don't share with anyone but my patrons, channel members, and subscribers, extra content, extra resources, and access to my Creative Contessa Discord server, then consider becoming a patron on Patreon, a YouTube channel member, or a Facebook subscriber. I'd also like to thank all of you who've given me little gems, those little gifts that YouTube is now authorized, and also all of my super chatters as well. If you have any questions and I didn't answer them, then pop them in the comments and I will get to them. And if you have any brilliant ideas as to what my medieval stripper name should be, let me know. Pop them in the comments as well.
Tanya.
Oh wow, Tanya, thank you. Really appreciate that. Super.
Missed most of the show.
Super generous. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you can watch the recording, hopefully. Really appreciate you, Tanya. The kitties love your admiration also. Otherwise, this coming week on my travels with the Creative Contessa, Monday evening in the US, Tuesday morning in Asia, and middle of the nightish in Europe and Central Asia, I will be interviewing 2 longtime employees of the cruise industry who will be sharing some of the crazy things that passengers have requested of them or done to them or said to them in their combined 40 plus years of working in the cruising industry. So if you're interested in learning the secrets of the cruise industry and also its dark underbelly, then join in for that fun on Travels with the Creative Contessa. Otherwise, this coming week, I will have Medieval Buzz with Philip from Irish Medieval History on Wednesday and Friday morning, where we will be talking about whatever is burning in the world of medieval history, and of course, answering your questions about life in the Middle Ages. Otherwise, everyone, I appreciate you all being part of this journey of exploration and learning. And until next time, may your adventures be creative. Bye, everyone.